So I want to call out the limited edition apparel. The link is in the description. As I've spoken about before, the limited edition apparel is apparel that I basically come up with. So some of the designs suck, some of them not so much. It's a weird thing. The ones that I think are going to do really well usually don't. The ones that I think aren't going to do really well do really well. Either way, they're all limited runs, so it changes, every single month. But all limited edition items are tri-blend material with, the cut that everybody wants now that's a little bit tighter on their arms so they can show off how big their fucking arms are. The limited edition items directly support the podcast. So head over, pick up your shirt today. Could be a hoodie. Could be shorts. We got these ball hugger shorts right now, which I would never wear, but I was told they were super popular. But you know what? They were wrong because they're still sitting there and I probably should discount them right now. Anyhow, if you want to see the discount on the ball hugger shorts, head over to the limited edition apparel, link in the description box.
Today's episode is brought to you by elitefts.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Nicolas Cambi. Do you go by Nick or Nicholas?
You can call me both.
So I'll call you both.
Yeah.
I'll flip it as we kind of go on. The intro here, I could either go with the analysis from the video that you just did or go off the two American strongman titles and the one world title in the 105 division.
Yes, sir.
And that was, I'm trying not to test my memory. 2021, right? And then 2022, was that the world?
So in 2021, actually, I had three major titles.
Yeah.
The first one was kind of like a North American title, then an American title, then a world title. And then I only defended one of those championships the year after because of some injuries.
Okay. And that was a back injury, I believe.
Yes. SI joint. Fun stuff.
And there's records that you hold. You had world records, but they've been beaten. So they're American records now?
Only one's been beaten. So 3 world records in the axle, the block, and the circus dumbbell, and then the American record in the log for 105 kilo.
So the pressing is that's your strong point.
It's my favorite. I think we were talking a little before the show. Just my leverages, just short arms, long legs. I love to split jerk. I like to do all the jerks, even the squat jerks. But just pressing, I just really took a hold of that, and then that used to be kind of my favorite, and then I kind of really developed myself on all the other events and facets of strongman.
And when this comes out, I think it's 2 days after this comes out, you're going to be doing a pressing seminar in North Carolina, I believe.
That's correct. And also a pressing seminar tomorrow.
And you got a pressing seminar tomorrow. So I was going to promote it, but they can go to the link in the description because I had them put a link to your link tree to be able to put any future seminars that you have in there, because we're going to talk about overhead pressing in here. Perfect. We're going to talk about a lot of topics here that I have. Where I want to start off is when I was going through your content to get a kind of feel of your history and your background. It all kind of starts with after wrestling.
Sure does.
So did you wrestle in high school? Because you were a collegiate wrestler, so you had
Correct.
to, right?
Yeah, so started in middle school, so 2 years in middle school, 4 years in high school. Football and wrestling were probably my two favorite sports, but I took to wrestling a little more. Got recruited for wrestling, so I went that route.
And where did you go?
I went to Roger Williams in Rhode Island. Okay. So I wrestled 197 for 3 years, and then wrestled heavyweight, which is 285 for a year.
All right, so that's wrestling. I have wrestling in my background as well, so not to that point, but the discipline and the training and the work ethic of wrestlers is a little different than a lot of other sports. Sure. So I'm curious as to that, when And some of the things that I've always seen with wrestlers when I was coming up is if you're running the stairs after practice, it's like for hours. Was that still like a thing when you were?
Not only did we run the stairs, we would do buddy carries up the stairs. So we do not only like piggybacks, but also the baby carry. So carry your partner that way. I think we did 3 or 4 different carries, including a fireman. So we do it up the stairs. We would do carries, and sometimes when I was a 197. Depending on who's there at practice, sometimes you get paired with the heavyweight. So the heavyweight has a great time picking you up, but when you get to pick up the heavyweight and go up the stairs, that wasn't much fun, but it did build a lot of character and it did build a lot of strength.
When you were in college then, in the strength and conditioning for wrestling, what did that look like? Let me back that up. Were you doing it or was the coach doing it?
There wasn't a set, let's talk about like the actual weight room. There wasn't a set program, so that was on me. Yeah, I was very kind of bodybuilding and squat focused. I actually didn't deadlift at all throughout my college years. And then when it came to actually the practices, we were pretty much doing kind of a lot of it was kind of. I think the more vigorous lifting would have been doing like the buddy carries, not only up the stairs, but sometimes we do kind of sprints across the gym. Holding our partners, but also there was a lot of sometimes like a lot of wrist work. So it would be a lot of kind of shadowing in terms of working on grip strength and all. But for the most part, I think a lot of it was application towards wrestling. So sometimes it would be within certain positions, or it would be within certain parameters, if it's a top, bottom, or neutral stance, depending on where you are I would say within the wrestling match.
Was it outside of the drills and the wrestling practice, the conditioning for that, was it more anaerobic based or aerobic based?
Want to refresh me on the two?
Well, the anaerobic would be kind of, what I'm trying to figure out is this what kind of led to strongman instead of bodybuilding the other stuff? Because the aerobic base is the long 15 steady state cardio type stuff that wrestlers are known for just doing it for really no reason. On the other side of that, it would be the things like sprints, short duration bouts. I think
it depends on the actual wrestler. I think since I was the top 2 weight classes in terms of weight, I think it would probably be more anaerobic. So prior to the short bursts, like my favorite was like a blast double. So put the head right in the sternum. So a lot of my moves were very kind of explosive moves. And then sometimes if I was up, maybe I would stall a little bit just to save gas. Maybe it was in a tournament. But maybe the more lighter weights would be more aerobic based and had probably the best conditioning on the team.
So I guess another way to look at it, one of them is really heavy breathing and short bouts, and the other one is, lighter breathing over a long bout.
Absolutely. But if you're trying to blast double a heavyweight, you're gonna have to be pretty strong, and you can't really be too conditioned. But what I loved, I think what wrestling helped kind of carry over, not only just great hip strength, but was more like pattern and mind-body connection. So I spent 10 years of drilling. So we would watch our coaches demonstrate a move. And then we had to replicate that in our mind and do it with our partner. So when it came to actually weightlifting and powerlifting and doing strongman, pretty much I would see something on the internet or see something in a seminar or see something on a strongman Saturday, and I had to replicate that myself. But I think that doing that for 10 years in wrestling and then carrying that over into lifting, I just had that mind-body connection already. So already was pretty familiar in terms of my body. I guess you could say a certain level of athleticism. So I was able to replicate that faster in a short period of time and be more proficient compared to maybe an amateur lifter that didn't wrestle.
And with the overhead type of stuff, I think some of the carryover there is knowing where your body is in space, right? Because when you're wrestling somebody, your next move is kind of dependent upon where you feel the pressure that they're applying to you. Or what move you have to react to where the pressure is. So in like a log, and because you have more of an Olympic type technique. I'm being careful to say this because it really isn't full Olympic, but it's more than a lot of the other guys. You have more of a split jerk.
Absolutely.
You're ducking under more than most.
Sure, absolutely.
Right. So that's also kind of coming from wrestling though too, right? Because of that reaction to the weight coming on.
Like of course, like level changing was a big thing in wrestling. So being able to change your positioning to either attack the legs or to get into a good takedown. But yeah, same thing in terms of Olympic level, you're kind of creating that space so you can be more efficient.
So when you're done wrestling, because it's weird because now you're in a strength sport where there's nothing that really says that you're done. Like wrestling, when you're done because there's what are you going to do?
I wasn't, so in college you do folk wrestling. And then beyond that, we got to go to the Olympics is freestyle and Greco. I never really trained that. So I would have been pretty much behind the curveball in that sense. So still had that competitive edge or competitive need when I was 22, 23 years old. So originally recruited to be a bodybuilder, but my bodybuilder coach a month in showed me strongman. And I was like, no way, Jose, this strongman thing is pretty cool. Yeah. So
that's why I wanted to go back because it makes sense now, right? Because the bodybuilder isn't the same. You spent how many years wrestling? When did you start?
10 years wrestling.
10 years. Did you start as a kid though?
7th grade.
7th grade. So a long time, 10 years wrestling, then bam, that's gone. And then bodybuilding, you're trying to fill a void.
Absolutely.
Bodybuilding isn't going to do that. Right. Where the strongman, I can see that.
And two, I was in a class, so we're getting like educated about bodybuilding. So the gentleman, his name is Christian Manti. He was like a natural bodybuilding coach, and he did like little courses, like an 8-week program or something like that. And we meet every week. But he was talking about the kind of the ins and outs of like natural bodybuilding, and it just seemed very subjective and not really appealing. And he said, and he was almost getting into like the politics of judging, even at the amateur level. And I wanted something that was like absolute. If you lift this weight, you win. If you do X, Y, and Z, you're gonna do better than the other guy. So I think that's why I gravitated towards something like strongman. And then learning about the vigorous diet of bodybuilding compared to strongman. Even though you do diet as a weight class athlete, I don't know if I could do that again after wrestling.
I didn't think about that.
Going 16 weeks of chicken and rice or something pretty strict.
How much did you cut when you were wrestling?
Probably 10 pounds. Like when I was doing 197 for the first 3 years, I was probably cutting like 10 pounds every week. And sometimes we have two meets. Sometimes we wrestle. We have meets on Saturday, and then a meet on Wednesday, and then another meet on another Saturday. So in 8 days, you cut weight 3 times.
Where would it go in the off season though?
I would get back up like 220.
Okay.
And then I'll slowly kind of work down. The first cut is always the worst. And
then,
and then the cut after Christmas is probably the absolute worst, because you get lazy and then you're coming back to it. I always thought like during intercession, getting back to it. I remember one time I really desperately had to make weight, and I was like only eating mangoes for a whole week.
See, that's the wrestler shit that I can remember. Stupid shit.
It was dumb. Looking back at it, I'm like, I could probably should have thrown some protein in there.
Exactly. It's stupid shit, but it's mental discipline too that comes around with that. What brought you into strongman then? So let's forget the bodybuilding. Actually, step back. Did the weightlifting happen before the strongman or after?
No. So I started. So the bodybuilding coach kind of introduced me to, I guess we did a strongman Saturday. So that was my first exposure. So with the whole bodybuilding team, we're doing strongman events. And then he said, you did a great job. You should hop in the contest that's in this location next week. And I did. I ended up taking like 4th place out of 6, but I just got a love for the sport. Met some great guys that day. And I thought it's really time to really kind of give this a shot. So I thought I'm actually going to train for a contest in September and see how it was. That happened to be the 2012 Mass State Championships at Total Performance Sports over at Murph's place. Yeah. So I was training over at that place over at TPS during the summer, and then I started going to of course TPS full time in October when I moved to Boston in 2012. But the weightlifting didn't start until 2013, because I just started. I started watching more Olympic lifting. I thought, oh, this is really fun. It'd be really cool to also learn this. So at one point, I thought I could do the dual thing. I was going to be an Olympic lifter, and also I want to do strongman. And when I was younger, I was pretty delusional. So I'm like, I'm going to go to the Olympics and go to World's Strongest Man at the same time. Yeah. So after a few years of training, I learned that was really plausible, but at that time, I think the sky was the limit. So I always just really took to cleans and jerks pretty well. Snatching was always kind of difficult for me. And then I started kind of training on my own. But then I got recommended to go down to an Olympic training center down in Norwood. So some guys that Murph used to have at TPS moved down to down to Norwood. So these 3 Russian coaches, Yasha, Nikita, and Vasily. And I went down there for probably like every other week and just learned the technique from them. And I always thought that the Russian technique was much more superior to the American technique. And I learned so much. But then at the same time, simultaneously, I was still doing strongman. I was actually competing in strongman, but I was still doing Olympic lifts during the same time. So I had that rare combo. I think I was only probably one of the very few people that was actually doing probably both simultaneously. And then I ended up applying all that Russian technique towards jerk. So a lot of it, is working the rack positioning, popping the weight off from your delts, not having the weight resting on your chest. So you almost doing like I call it the body pop in my seminars, but being able to use your delts to push the weight up and then get under it. And then when you're getting under it, you have a really strong base and you're almost bending at the knees, ankles, rather than bending at the elbows. So all those concepts apply to strongman. And I felt like that really propelled me, especially kind of in the overhead press. And even to today.
When did you decide to go all in with strongman?
I think there's been like different times in my life. So probably 2015, I won my pro card. The week after I won my pro card, I did my only Olympic lifting meet. And I won that, and I thought it was a lot of fun, but I realized all the snatch work I was doing didn't really correlate well to doing my strongman training. Cause snatch is just so much technique involved, but clean and jerks were still very beneficial for my training. So in 2015, I'm like, I'm going to start cutting out some of the Olympic stuff, and start really honing down on strongman. But that was 2015. I was a young guy. I was like 26. So I was still I was living in South Boston. I don't know if you've been to Boston before, but Boston's a big drinking city. So I was still partying a lot, going to clubs and all. So I think once I started going to Worlds and America's Strongest Man in like 2016, 2017, I kind of started doubling down a little bit in terms of, I'm getting pretty good at this. I should, of course, put a little more effort. And I think probably the most, but I was still kind of at a foot out of the door because I think I still was kind of not putting as much work into my diet and my rest and my recovery. And then I think in 2020, when strongman got taken away from me, that's when I really realized that, wow, I was like, this is what I every day I thought about it. I missed it. I wanted to get back to it. So I was like, if strongman comes back, we didn't know back in February, March of 2020, if what the world's going to be like coming back. But if it comes back, I'm going to come back roaring. So that was kind of my mission. That's when I think I really put all my marbles in. But I think it was throughout my career that I started to really, I slowly started. So it wasn't like I was like, maybe when I won my pro card in 2015 and then 2020 is when I went really all in.
I think that's interesting though, that if we think about it, because your first one was in 2012, right? Mm-hmm. Where every week I get some type of email or some type of message from somebody who's in their young 20s or a teenager that they're all into whatever it is, powerlifting, whatever it is, and they're going to be the best. And maybe they will be. Right. But they have no idea what that even means, at that point. So in 2012, I don't want to say it's a hobby, but you're just kind of messing around with it. Then each one of those marks a different level of mental commitment, maybe.
Sure. Yeah.
Or buy-in, where if you weren't taking the nutrition seriously or as serious as you should, on the other side of that is you probably didn't have to. And you didn't know you needed to. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Because when the all-in thing's always it's an odd thing to me, because your all-in is going to be different than somebody else's all-in, but yet it could still be their all-in because they have no idea what the difference is, sure. Between all that. But in strength sports and a lot of other business strength sports, a lot of things, the all-in becomes very conveniently defined based upon what they want to do and what they don't want to do. Like some people are all in because they want to do stupid shit, like heavy training all the time. And then that's all in, but they're not going to be all in if you need to back down just a little bit.
My rest was always crap, even in my early years. But even like looking back at it, I always thought maybe if I bought into maybe resting or diet and some of the other facets, I would have progressed a lot faster. But sometimes like life kind of carries you in different ways. And of course, I think it all came together after the pandemic. But I guess I wouldn't change it for a thing. But a story that I always like sharing is that in like 2015, Eric Dawson, he had Brian Shaw come up for a seminar. So Brian Shaw was doing like a whole like 3 or 4 hour talking about his things. But I remember when he came there, he was about $300. But what I thought about him, like, well, $300 for a big guy to talk about doing events, like he doesn't know technique. So I was like, I'm not going to go to it because I thought $300, like that's 3 nights drinking. So my perception back then just wasn't there. But now when I think about it, there was a 4-time World's Strongest Man pretty much came to one of my gyms, and I didn't stop there. So I think at the time, again, delusional when I was young. So I think at the time I wish I bought in, but again, I guess you got to learn the hard way sometimes.
Well, here's the tricky question where you also have, I think you've competed 37 times, 39 times. The video that you did, by the way, is awesome because where you recapped your whole
absolutely.
career. That's freaking,
Thank you.
that was awesome. But when I see things like that and you see how many, because people will hear your titles, but they have no idea how many times you've competed. And even a story like that, I wonder if there were fewer competitions, if your mindset would have been in the same place. You know, by that time, that 2015, there were, I don't know if you broke it down by year. Let's say you competed 20 times before that.
Sure.
That's a lot of experience to look back on and say, I could have done this, and this. But if it was only 4 times, I don't know. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if it's the number of times that somebody competes or the years. It's a weird thing to look back on.
You know, it's interesting because I always think I've competed a lot, but now I look at these European guys and they compete 10 or 12 times a year, and they have almost competitions like every other weekend. But I think sometimes certain individuals will sometimes kind of treat like going a strongman Saturday like a competition. So sometimes they're getting that good experience, but not actually on a competition floor. So I think it really depends on. I always said that like if you're going over a year without training for competitions, that's almost like a year off from like strongman, right? If you're always training for a certain competition, you're never not doing kind of strongman. So I think I always had a competition in mind, so I was never really out of it. But what I tell kids, if I could do it again, I would push myself to do more competitions.
The point that you made is for when there's that many competitions, I have to believe that a lot of those aren't really, they're just training days, that they're not peaked. But if it happens to be a really good day, obviously you're going to take advantage of that really good day. It's when I was coming up, there was a powerlifting crew in Cleveland, and they used to squat, bench, and deadlift every weekend. And then when meets would come around, they would just do it. You know, they were doing heavy singles and triples anyhow, so they just do the meet. But it wasn't always their best because they weren't peaked for obviously different reasons. But they were learning the skill and learning how. So you would look and say they have they've done 100 meets or whatever it is, and that gets confusing to people too. Because at that time, I'm looking at them and I'm like, oh shit, I'm not competing enough. But I didn't realize that's how they train. They're going to do it anyhow, you know. So that's a kind of a difference maker there. If you're to give advice to somebody coming up, because now there's more shows, abilities to compete than in the past, would you suggest that they compete more and treat a lot of those as training days, or peak for 3 or 4 years?
So I think I think I did a video one time on this. So I think sometimes you're going to have like A days, B days, C days, and D days. So I think you're only able to really execute and be peaked for maybe like 1 or 2, 3 shows a year, but you can still be very strong or very capable of doing a strongman contest 3 or 4 times in the year. So sometimes I always said, like, if you're a young guy, you could, for instance, do a bunch of local shows in the beginning of the year and then focus on like the postseason in the fall, where you have, let's just say, like strongman nationals or like a world championship coming up. So you can focus on the little shows, which is not that heavy, get experience being able to really show your best self on game day, because you can always do whatever in the gym, but there's a skill to really put it all together on game day and be able to bring your best self somewhere new. Like, just like we were talking before, I went heavy today on deadlifts because I wanted to do something heavy somewhere new that I've never been before. It's because that, again, there's always going to be variables and you'd be able to handle variables. So being able to do that earlier in the year, and then when times comes for that one big national show, that's when you execute. That's when you put a 12-week prep in. That's when you really peak, and that's where you really see how you stand against the nationals, and to see if you need to do more or less compared to where your result and where you wanted to in your overall goals.
So do the nationals, I assume, right? But it gets convoluted because it's different, because there's different federations. So I'm not going to get into federation bullshit. So, do the nationals per whatever federation somebody's in typically always happen at the same time or the same month?
I would say sometimes different year per year. But when I was getting started earlier, it was usually in the nationals was in the fall.
Okay.
So you're able to kind of stack up some shows. Sometimes I used to jump into heavyweight, so I didn't have to cut weight, be able to get that experience of competing. And if we're going heavy, we're actually doing heavier weights. So I didn't have to cut weight. I was getting that experience of competing, doing heavier weights, and then I was more formidable when it came to cutting weight and competing in my own weight class at either a national or like America's Strongest Man.
So when you were coming up before 2021, so let's just say that was what was the best year that you've had so far.
Sure was.
So when you were coming into that year, did you have a long-term strategy coming into the year? So if we back it off, say to 2016, so right shortly after one of your decisions to pick up the game, were you looking at it as here's where I want to be in 4 years, or are you looking at it as here's where I want to be next year?
I think a lot of it was at that point was just to get to the big contests, just to qualify and be able to be there.
Okay.
Because I think that's almost an experience in itself. You're almost getting into a new network of guys, not only getting competing against the best guys, but you get to see how they move and see how they prep for a thing. So being on a different level and then being surrounded by people, again, kind of sometimes being the weakest guy in the room is sometimes beneficial because you get to learn so much. But at that time, those big contests weren't necessarily granted to me. So I had to qualify for my first Worlds in 2016. I qualified for America's Strongest Man in 2016, the year before, when I won my pro card in 2015. So I already had that on the schedule, but the Worlds and some of the other shows weren't guaranteed. So just getting there was my first step. And of course I always wanted to go out and win those shows, but I learned over time, sometimes it takes like being in those shows 1 to 3 times, even 4 times to actually start podium and winning those shows. But you at least need to get there first and set a baseline and then be able to ramp up and see how you test. But a lot of times you got to at least get to that show.
Okay. I think I see where you're going here. If, say, with Olympic weightlifting, you're going to have, a lot of times I'll look at quadrennials based upon Olympic years or Worlds or however that's going to fall, or not the World Cup, whatever it is. It's like the in between the Olympic years. So they're looking like 2 years or 4 years. And you were looking at, you started this. So you want to compete at the national level. So that was like the first quadrennial kind of look at it. And then after that, now you're at the national level, you want to win a pro card. Yes. And then that's the next quadrennial. But then after the pro card, I'm going to assume it's let's win a pro show. Yeah. Right. So is that how the processing is in your head?
I think so. Yeah, that was pretty much, I had to get there first, and then like establish kind of like how I rank against the best, because of course I see those guys' numbers sometimes like, oh, I can beat these guys, but not until I actually get into the ring with the guy, I didn't know how to exactly process there. But pretty much I would say usually it will go from like a national to let's just say a pro level show to a world show would probably be like the hierarchy.
Okay. That's the easy part. Now for the hard part, how do you structure your training for that?
So I think in between shows or in the off season,
well, let's go back. So now you're just trying to qualify for the national. So how are you structuring the training then, even if it is like, fuck, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just showing up doing shit.
So for instance, if there was a national qualifier coming up, I think at the time I was probably doing like a 6 to 8 week prep. But I still had some focus. I wasn't let's just say I wasn't not committed all the way, but I wasn't all in when it came to just event specific stuff. I was still doing items that were focused on hypertrophy and strength building that would benefit me overall as an athlete going forward.
But do you know the items? I mean, what you're going to compete in?
Usually, like the local shows, you have a pretty good idea, at least 6 weeks out of what the competition. Sometimes events are not out before 12 weeks, but between that, like 6 to 8 weeks, usually most shows will have the events out there, and sometimes they'll have a mystery event just to have a mystery event.
All right. So then, when did you start becoming specific for those shows?
When
back then.
Back then, I would say I probably started buying in probably if I had time, like for America's Strongest Man in 2016, I put a decent prep together, but I was also pretty beat up from the year, so I was doing what I could. For that Worlds that year, I qualified in Indiana, but the Worlds was 3 weeks later, so I had to qualify first. So I wasn't planning on the events there, so I was just kind of just going with the flow, right? I just I was hoping I was get to Worlds, and I got the third that year, and that was the last spot to make it to Worlds that year for the 105s. And then I was like, oh, I made it to Worlds. Now I got to figure out a 3-week prep to best, especially what I'm doing. But at that time, in that 3-week prep, I was selling out. I was just doing very event specific work compared to maybe doing some hypertrophy and strength building during that time. But I sold out in terms of focus on the events because this was the Worlds for the year.
What do you mean by sell out?
So sometimes there's in your programming, you can focus very event heavy, or you can maybe take a step back and focus on strength building being like squat, bench, deadlift, but you also can do bodybuilding movements to build the hypertrophy, put on more mass so you can make that mass, I guess, stronger in the long run. So if you're very event specific, you're not going to have too many exercises that are going to be towards that. Of course, usually there's always a deadlift in the event, so you're usually doing a deadlift no matter what, but I'm not going to be benching 2 weeks out from a show.
Yeah. Now the show's over and there's not another one within 4 or 6 weeks. So it's not, and this is back then. What did that non-selling out period look like? So that off season.
So look like? it's gonna be probably power building. So powerlifting and bodybuilding.
What does it look like? I mean, run me through how you would explain that.
So I probably would have like a upper day where I would probably focus on maybe either like have probably some core, like a cleaning press, but I'll probably be doing more volume, and then followed up by kind of bodybuilding accessories. And then it probably would have a deadlift day, squat day, maybe a light event day, or maybe I would have like a back and accessory days. So if I have 4 times, but I think back then I was lifting maybe like 4 to 6 times a week. Now I'm anywhere between 3 to 4 days a week.
Yeah.
But just focusing on probably just overall strength, and then closer to the contest, you start adding in those events. You add in events 12 weeks and past, like at over 70-80%, you're going to start getting beat up, and you're going to be pretty beat up by the time of contest. So you got to really be conscious of when you add those events. But usually as the contest gets closer, you start throwing in more event work. Like for instance, like as I say, a heavy yoke. If I was doing heavy yoke 12 weeks out, you're going to be broken by the time competition comes. Is that,
so let's jump to basically how, I don't want to jump that far just yet. So, okay. During 2020, obviously everything locks down, training changes, everything changes, but it creates I'm going to assume for yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, it creates some type of deload environment.
Absolutely.
Right. So during that time for you, how much of a deloaded environment was that?
It was pretty significant. So it was the only thing I had. Murph lent me his Thomas Inch dumbbell, so that was my recreational thing on Saturdays. So I'll be pressing that over at my parents' place because I was in a apartment at the time. But everything else was either bicep or like light dumbbell work or weight vest walks, which I haven't touched since the pandemic.
Yeah.
So for the most part, that was, let's see, I didn't get back to the gym until June or July. So that was 3 or 4 months of probably pure deload, rest of the joint. So it probably did me good.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, right? Yeah. If you're to break that time period from when things shut down to the best year you ever had, and then break it into phases.
Sure.
You got this 3 or 4 month phase of doing weight vest walks, deloading more or less. And then that led into, now from there, what did you do when you got back into the gym? Did you just go ape shit, or did you?
I went ape shit a little bit.
So that doesn't fit where I was hoping it was going to go. So what was the adaptation like when that happened? Like, what, your recovery had to suck, right?
Yeah. So I was out of shape. But however, but at that point I started meal prepping. I started prioritizing sleep. At the time I just moved in with my now wife, so I didn't have to travel back and forth. So my rest was so much better. I cut down on the drinking. So I really started really kind of almost being kind of like not a strongman monk. I was still pretty social, but I was still, I was really bought in at the most at that time.
Yeah.
So I was kind of going a little crazy, some heavy lifts. I had to get it out of my system. But then that November, America's Strongest Man got announced. So 12 weeks out, I had something to kind of focus towards. And I decided that at that time, it was just a great opportunity. If I can come out of the pandemic stronger and more committed than everybody else, I think I have a good chance of winning. Ended up taking second that year, but it was pretty close from my goal.
How many? That was 12 weeks from when you went back into the gym. So you're back in the gym and you're going ape shit, right?
Sure.
But that's probably not as demanding as what I thought it is, because you changed a lot of other variables.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're living with your girlfriend, wife now at the time, so stress is lower, the nutrition's better, sleep's better. A lot of things are better.
Mm-hmm.
So that can kind of offset some of the stupidity.
Yes.
Some, not all, but some. Then how, from that time period, when was that show?
So ASM was so I got back to the gym in July. ASM was in November. So the first couple months I was pretty much doing kind of whatever kind of workouts. And then I started focusing on a particular goal. But originally when I came back to the gym, we didn't know when there was going to be a contest. So first I just had to get the heavy lifts out of my system from missing out on 2 or 3 months worth of workouts. And then I started kind of being more disciplined and programming and focusing on a good peak for the show.
All right, then that led to one great performance, another great performance, another great performance until you broke yourself, right?
Yes. there we go. Yeah. Really,
well, first off, before you broke yourself, how many was it? It was like 18 months, right? If I'm looking at that right, for you to get 2 worlds or whatever, 2 worlds or 2 whatever the hell, 2 worlds, 3 big championships. Mm-hmm. Is it about 18 months for all 3 of those to happen?
Just about. It was 4. So I did 5 shows in 2021 and then November. So yeah, about 20 months.
Okay, so 20 months.
But I could have been I missed out on one show because I had to pull out because the SI. But pretty much. Actually, what was your?
Well, what I was getting at is how long of a run was it? So was the SI before the 5th show?
No, it was after Worlds in December. So it was after the 5th show.
So it would have been the 6th.
6th, yeah.
Okay, so yeah.
So I didn't take an off season. I thought I was taking an off season, but it wasn't an off season.
Okay, that's why I was trying to get to.
I was complacent.
So it's an 18-month run, which looking back, how long do you think that should have run?
I should, I think just at that point I was just on a mission to kind of win all the federation's biggest contests. But I should have took more of a break and then maybe done like an 8-week prep looking back at it. But I started, I think, prepping for this show in April at the time in 2022, like 16 weeks out.
Yeah.
Because I was just gung-ho. I was just being selfish and I wanted it all. So, and then ended up burning out like 5 weeks out, getting banged up on all these different injuries. And then of course 10 days out, I ended up hurting the SI, and then I had to pull out because I was crooked.
All right, so that's almost 30.
Has that ever happened to you? You ever been crooked?
I've been crooked.
Yeah,
I've been crooked a lot of different ways. But my back been crooked. My arms been crooked. Shoulder, yeah. But that's like, say that's 30. I just guess and say that's 30 shows in from the start. Had you seen people basically break themselves doing the same thing that you did
Absolutely.
before? So it's the reason I'm putting this out there is usually I don't want to say, but you think you're going to be different than the others for whatever reason. It just comes with the territory of being a strength athlete. Until you actually do it, then hopefully you never do it again, right? Because you think a little more. So what did you learn from that?
Just a lot of times winning masks bad habits, right? So I had a few bad habits.
What do you mean?
Well, you get complacent. So like when you're winning, like, oh, like I was overtraining at the time. I was like, oh, I can't overtrain. I'm number one, right? So I think I just kept training. I probably should have, I think, maybe done a lighter, more restorative, especially competing 5 times that year. And then the year before, I went only competing once. So I had a nice break going into that year. I should have took a step down, maybe worked on some other kind of weaknesses. I think I probably should have done a little more. Where I think a lot of it came from not having I think my quads and hips were very tight. My obliques could have been stronger. My core work could have been better. So I could have gone back to that, but I was just pretty gun ho and I was doing some heavy event training leading up into the show. And that will kind of break you. So we were saying before, if you do event training too far out or if you're trying to peak too far out from a contest, you're going to break down closer to the show and you want to be 100% coming to the show.
It's close to 100%.
Close.
Yeah. So it's there. That I think that can be another misconception, though, too. That's part of the peaking process, right? Is you're going to get close to the edge. You're going to not break yourself, but you kind of break yourself enough that when you go to rest, you'll super compensate and hit into the powerlifting is going to be the same way. Other sports are going to be the same way. Sure. It's when you start stringing them back to back without having some type of off season. I don't want to say restorative off season, but some type of off season. But something you said earlier, kind of, there's multiple federations, right? So you wanted to win all the federation titles, but that in strength sports, and it's not just strongman, it's not just powerlifting, it's like all of them. Like how many? At some point, I mean, if we just keep projecting 5 years from now, there'll be 4 other federations, which will mean the kid coming up that's listening to this, that's in high school right now, if they wanted to win all the federation titles, there's going to be like 12. It's it's unrealistic at a certain point in time. I don't want to say why, because I understand why. What I guess I can ask now is if somebody was asked, so you do a seminar this weekend and somebody asked that's not a pro yet, but they're almost there, right? Because there's a lot of people that try to qualify for some of these pro qualifiers, right? It's not like 3 people deep. It's pretty deep. So it's, what do you tell them when it comes to how frequently at that level, how frequently they should compete? I guess, would you call that a high intermediate at that level in strongman? I
would say intermediate.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say, for instance, if it's your first or second year, you're probably gonna be in the kind of the local contest realm. So sometimes it could be the parking lot shows, or it might be the gym shows. I think you can do as many of those in a year, and I think you're not going to kind of break yourself. When you start getting into the kind of like the national level shows, a little heavier, a little more competitive, I think you could probably do 1 or 2 of those. So I think a lot of it's, we were mentioning before, like there's different peaks, different preps. You can do a 3-week prep, you can do a 6-week prep, you can do a 12-week prep. But you only have so many 12-week preps. So if there's someone that's been doing strongman for 3 or 4 years, I would say that you should, let's say the show that they want to do is in December, leading in the spring and maybe in the summer, you could do a bunch of fun shows to kind of try different events, but not really peaking, but then really sell out for the last contest where you're focusing so much on your sleep and your rest, and then really executing to see kind of where you're at and how you measure up on the national level. But I would say that everybody should have an off season, but everybody's season is going to be different depending on the event they choose. And then also there's life comes around. So of course there's celebrations. There's always like tragedies. We have all different factors that kind of come into your life. But I think a lot of it, you got to play your cards and see what fits into your schedule and kind of what fits towards your goals. Sometimes someone's goal might just be competing twice a year. But some individuals can compete maybe or have a much more flexible lifestyle, and they're able to compete often. But I would say for the most part, you're going to have a season and you're going to have an off season. And sometimes you can talk something like have a mid season where you're leading into a shows. Like for myself right now, I'm in a mid season where I'm ramping up for competitions in the fall. But right now I'm starting going pretty heavy compared to where I was when I was coming off after the Arnold, going into my bachelor party, my wedding. I was only training only a couple times a week. But right now I'm in my mid-season training, so I'm kind of building that foundation to be ready for the off season. So pretty much you're going to have different seasons, but again, each individual is going to be it's going to be different depending on what they can fit in their schedules, what they can afford, and how much they want to travel.
With you, your background is the wrestling it's technique it's a technical sport, right? It's a very technical sport, and strongman's a technical sport as well. So when you're at your level, I don't want to say it's not as technical, but you know a lot of the technical skills. You just got to kind of keep them fresh, right? Where if they're learning those technical skills, would you advise that they practice them to some degree all year?
Sure. I think some individuals can do some event training all year round. But I think they probably could just scale it back to anywhere between like 60 and 70%.
Yeah.
And then some individuals don't really need to focus on event training. They just need to work on getting stronger and focus on that power building that we were mentioning before, focus on those lifts and then get back into event training. But it all really depends on strongman is such a nuanced sport because there's just 30 different events and 4 different styles. You can have medleys and maxes and ladders, and sometimes reps. And reps. Yeah. So there's so many different kind of variations in terms of like one event. So it really depends on, for a while, I was really good at overhead maxes, but I was never really good at reps. So I would work back to different kind of techniques. Sometimes I adopt new techniques in the off season. But
so your technique will change.
Pretty much or adopt new techniques, right? Sometimes you have one technique for one event, and then as you progress as a strongman, you'll have 5 different techniques for one event. So for instance, like on stones, I can one motion the stone. So that's just bringing it, of course, going right from the ground to the platform. Sometimes I have a quick lap into the load, and sometimes I have a kind of a more tactical stone load to the platform. So I have like almost 3 different ways I can load the stone that I've narrowed down the technique. And then same thing, let's just say for over presses. So of course I like to split jerk, but I also have become very proficient in the push press and strict press. I think good strongmen should have a combination of all 3. But for instance, I need at one point in my career, I needed to start working on push press and strict press because I was getting beat when it came to like reps or medleys, where you're doing kind of quick sprints. It's easier to viper or strict press the weight rather than go in there, clean the weight, and then take a pause and then split jerk, right? And when people could just strict press and then go into the other thing. So I was a stronger presser on them, but I wasn't faster, and I didn't have the right technique for that particular application.
So that's where things become nuanced as all hell, right?
So it's a Wild West. It's still Wild West, even though it's been around for 30, 40 years. Because
the easy way I can relate it to people that would be listening is if it's equipped powerlifting, sometimes you can't even learn how to use it unless you're at 90%, right? Because it's not going to touch and all this other kind of stuff. Hence the problem. You have to be strong enough to handle the 90% without breaking you down. Now, a raw bench press, which should be trained, kind of all the time, you can practice your technique on that with the bar, 135. A split press, for instance, you can practice the Olympic, the technique on that with submaximal weights.
Sure.
A strict press, I don't know how much, I don't know how much the light weights are really going to help with your technical aspects of a heavy single, because it's nuanced as hell, right? And I think that is, I won't make the assumption. I'll ask you because you're around these people. Is that where those intermediate lifters are screwing up? Is they're overdoing some aspects like of that technique and underdoing that? They don't know the difference between the two.
Absolutely. And sometimes they have the wrong focus, right? Sometimes they focus on their strengths and never really focus on like kind of their weaknesses. So maybe they'll spend 10 weeks focusing on pressing, deadlifting, but then you have yoke and carry events and stones, and they didn't work their anaerobic or any of their kind of like long endurance movements. So it's sometimes they just don't have that mentality of, because strongman, of course you're scored on across the board, not on just particular one or two events. So sometimes they don't really focusing on their weaknesses or what they need to improve in order to improve their total score come game day.
All right, back to your own training. If I'm kind of breaking down how you train now in phases, you're like in a phase 2. Like the phase 1 was a couple days per week. The phase 2 is basically build your maximal strength. And then a phase 3 is more of a transitional, start to get ready for the contest. And then phase 4 will be once you know the events, kind of peaking. Is that
fine tuning? Yes.
Pretty. So in this phase 2, are you pushing your maximal strength? So the deadlift like you did today, are you going to push that? Obviously you're going to push it to a high level, but will that high level exceed what's going to be required when you actually compete? So in other words, to use real numbers, because you're not going to be deadlifting 4 weeks out before me. But let's say you work your deadlift up to being able to do 830 for 3, right? And then in the next phase, when you can maintain most of that, how much of that, in other words, are you building it to a higher level that you know it's going to come down, but when it comes down, 800 for 3 could be doable if you actually wanted to do it, which you're not going to do it, which is 4 weeks out. Does that make sense? So are you trying to become more strong than you need to be in this phase for what you're going to need to when you compete? With those movements.
That's a great question. I would say yes. I think you're preparing for you're preparing for all different situations. I think you want to focus on like let's just stick on the deadlift. So moving up from 105 kilo to a heavyweight, some of the heavyweights have monster deadlifts. That's where that area where I had a good deadlift at 105, but I don't have a good deadlift for a heavyweight. So I really have to work on that. So I for instance put a set a goal of I want to hit 800 for 4 by the end of the summer. So I want to do that for a set. That might be more than I have to do for a competition, but I know, for instance, if I get to that number, I'll be pretty set if I have a reps from the floor, or I could have a 13-inch deadlift, or I could have a deadlift medley. But I know that 800 for 4 will get me will make me pretty, let's just say, ready for any kind of situation when it comes to a deadlift variation or a certain deadlift event.
So if I was to step back and look at this from a macro level, this block is an absolute strength block.
Yes.
That's where your concern is. It's just that. So it's not the transference, and it's not, is it the absolute strength? I mean, in the lower rep ranges. So you're not focusing on the higher rep ranges right now as much?
Yeah, just anywhere. 5-3-1, pretty much.
Okay, all right.
Actually, probably not focus on too much ones. I think I'm focused on more at least 2 or more.
The building.
Yeah.
So not the peaking. Now the next phase that comes in, more of a transitional phase, I guess you could say, right? What does that look like? Because you don't know the events yet, and it's not going to be super event focused. So some of this is going to bleed out, and then other stuff's going to come in. What will those things be?
So a lot of it is just kind of taking it in stride.
Yeah.
So for instance, if I like hit my goal, and then from there I'll probably maybe kind of slow down and maybe kind of start working maybe higher rep ranges and maybe like a little bit more hypertrophy. But I usually kind of will go back between the two, depending if my body's willing. As long as I can recover and be able to get back to that point, I might go back into kind of a little bit of a hypertrophy phase and kind of just maintain strength. And then I'll get really kind of focused until I have the events come out. I could have a situation where the events come out and I start from kind of zero, where I start with high rep ranges 8 weeks out, and I get into the like the 3 or 2 or 3 reps closer to the competition.
What metrics do you use? Because I understand that
I'm not too scientific, Dave.
Well, I know that, but let me help you out here a little bit. I know at the level that you're at, because it's going to be true with any strength sport. So much of it is intuitive. Mm-hmm. It's you're auto regulating all that. So what are the things that you're using to determine, should this be more hypertrophy based? Should it be more strength based? Obviously, your body weight as you're going up is going to be a metric that you're going to follow. Certain lifts in the gym are going to be a metric, because if they I'm trying to do this in a way that people listening will understand. It's not always the weight and the number, but it's how it actually feels, right? So it's a 300-pound overhead press can feel like shit, or it could be really, really easy. Or let's say you could hit a PR and grind it, and it's a motherfucker, and your shoulders hurt and everything hurts. And then you could also hit 30 pounds under the PR, but it's smooth and super easy.
Yes.
So are there exercises or movements that you're using to kind of gauge where you are, to know what needs to happen next? Or change?
No, I'm going to go back to the answer I've been going to. I think depending on the goals.
Well, how do you establish those
goals? So let's just say, like right now, of course, I have the strength building goal of the deadlifts. Eventually, I want to ramp up on my log as well. I think just having a big log is pretty cool. But
all right, wait, let's just pause there, because I'll remember where you're at. Why not both at the same time?
I think that's pretty. Let's just say consuming. I would say I think it's hard to do. It's hard to do both. So right now, when I was doing the last block, I was focused on strict log and then heavier deadlifts. If I was doing split jerk deadlift, but that'd be kind of cool. But if I was doing split jerk on the log,
Jefferson's
that would be 400 pound cleans, and then that's pretty taxing. I think any split jerk is probably what taxes me the most, even probably more than a deadlift. So I would say that would be pretty tough. So I think it would be hard. Pretty much both of those lifts would kind of cancel out. So I wouldn't be able to do one or the other very efficiently.
So when you put that block out and you lay that block out, I think we're getting there now. How do you know what to build? So
I think I start. Well, sometimes it's just kind of just from my mentor. One of my mentors, he's like, you have a great deadlift, but you gotta. His name is Sean DeMarini. He's like, you have a great deadlift, but you gotta really step it up. You're behind when it comes to where you want to be if you want to roll with the heavyweights. So I kind of shifted a lot more focus on deadlifting, and then I kind of build everything else around it. Kind of supplement different lifts or complement different lifts where I'm able to achieve the main goal, but then maybe have other sub goals for different areas. Where I'm still I'm doing heavy deadlifts, but I'm still doing some good hypertrophy for back, legs, and shoulders. So in this phase there, where is your, or is there not the anaerobic training? So it's the 1 minute type shit, the time type stuff, or is it not in this block at all? Not in this block, no, because that'll probably be more contest specific. And then how far out from the contest will you start rolling those things in? Probably the first block. Like for instance, let's say we have like a 12-week block. I like to do 3-week blocks with a deload in between, 1 week deload in between. So probably the second 2 blocks is when I start probably ramping up into the 60-second bursts, similar to a kind of competition. Maybe I'll do like 70-80% of the weight, but that would probably be 6 to 8 weeks out. All right, so you're adding weight. How much weight have you put on in the last, say, 6 months or last year? In terms of my deadlift? No, your body weight. Body weight. Sure. So before America's Strongest Man, I think I'm 30 pounds. I think I've gained 30 pounds since October. And where do you think it will be by the time you compete next time? Ooh, I think I want to stay here, but lean up. Okay. All right. So be a really I don't know why I'm
Recomp.
blanking. I'd say recomp, but a very sturdy 285. I'm kind of fluffy. I'm a little chunky.
Okay.
But maybe look. I don't know if you ever look some of the other heavyweights these days, but like they're starting to get really lean. There's a guy named Pablo Cordiaca, and there's even like Evan Singleton. They're very lean heavyweights. They have like abs. This Pablo is like 286, but Evan, who just won a Giants live show, he's 350, and he pretty much has abs.
Well, how tall is he?
6'4", 6'5".
Okay. All right.
But yeah, he's pretty jacked. But right now I'm fatter than him.
Well, I know, but the reason I'm asking is because if you kept pushing that up, say you want to be 310, then I have to wonder where your endurance is going to be putting 50 pounds on over a period of a year.
Sure.
And if you're doing anything to try to maintain that endurance, because if somebody goes up, and you're not doing that, but if somebody goes up 50, 60 pounds and then just expects it to be there 3 weeks out.
Sure. I think my first goal was to get to 275, and then I got to 275 in December. So I gained 20 pounds really quickly. And then I tried to stay there for the Arnold prep. And then throughout kind of the little off season I had, and then after the wedding, I started gaining weight. So so after maybe the summer, I'll probably try to recomp a little more, to be a leaner 285. And then who knows, next year, maybe I want to stay at this weight and recomp even more. Or maybe I try to push 290, maybe 300. I think it would be cool to be 300 one day, but it's not a great health goal, but it's a good goal to have me at least want to do maybe once in my.
It's really not about health with what you're doing.
Yeah,
now,
no,
right?
it's not.
So,
it's not.
Have you found? I mean, if you're gaining weight, you have more muscle. The more muscle requires more oxygen. More oxygen is going to change how you're going to have to breathe. On higher rep things. Have you noticed that as you've gone up, or has it not hit you?
I was heavy breathing today.
Yeah,
yeah, I was huffing and puffing. I wasn't sure if it was from the plane ride over or anything like that.
It's humid as hell.
It is. But yeah, I think I'm not as nimble as I was when I had a six pack and I was 231.
Yeah.
So I think that's just an adjustment. But I think in good time, I think I could be close to where I was, where I had the aerobic capacity at 231, but at a higher weight class. But that's gonna take time.
At any point, would you throw in light aerobic work to try to build that up?
I think I like doing different blocks. So like usually kind of 3 weeks at a time, depending where I'm at. So if I'm able to hit certain goals within that block, then I kind of move on to the next phase where I can improve myself in all different facets. If that's, again, aerobically, if that's put on muscle, that's put on strength, that I try to find somewhere in there that I want to, that would be the best thing for me at that time. Given what's going on later in the year.
Okay.
So so to answer your question, I'm probably going to do that starting in September, and then probably mix that in with some comp prep.
How many years did it take because you're basically you're laying these blocks out. You know where you need to be when you need to be there, right? That's in the fall when you go to compete. Mm-hmm. And as you move closer to that, you're kind of self-analyzing after each block. Mm-hmm. This was good. Here's what has to come into there. When did that thought process start to come into focus for you?
Probably 2020. I didn't really do like deload weeks before then. So okay. I used to go I started getting banged up at fourth or fifth week. I didn't know what's going on. And then I wasn't hitting the numbers I was going to, but I wasn't resting appropriately. So then when I started doing the 3 week blocks, I was, and then taking a deload week, I started seeing not only good progress, but I was hitting my goals.
Well, there's more than just the deload week, because you're analyzing how the block go, where do you need to be, what mm-hmm. needs to come into there. And with that, where there, people or resources or things that you found to be able to help you lay those things out and to know what to look at.
So as a 231, I think just a lot of the kind of resources, I think I had a great coach that got me back into kind of hypertrophy training in 2019. So I rolled with him for about 6 months. His name was Terry Rady. And he was able to kind of start helping me put on more muscle. I had a kind of a conjugate focus. But I had a conjugate focus with event training. So I was too event heavy in my programming. Yeah. But he was able to help me kind of scale that back. So I was able to start seeing some good progress when I started adding more hypertrophy movements. So not only kind of the coaching, but I was also be able to kind of see some good progress when I started looking at just programming that's out there. Even like, for instance, like of course, TPS runs like a 5-3-1 method. Of course, I've always taken a look at that. So a lot of times it just depending on, I guess, sometimes what I'm what's my goals, but also kind of what's the mood in. But I think I pulled resources from not only Olympic lifting, but bodybuilding, powerlifting, and then other strongman programs. So I think a good strongman, it has almost a combination of all four.
Yeah. But it's not just a combination of all four, because if you stacked them all, you'd be fucked.
Yeah. So,
right. So you have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
The elements.
But depending on the timing of the year, but you're good. Yeah. You're doing a certain amount of elements kind of throughout. I was almost thinking about, actually, I'm probably going to do it. I think depending, but in strongman, you could, and especially in the heavyweight scene, there's so many contests now that you could someone gets injured, you can get the call up. He's like, Nick, can you be available for a competition in 3 weeks? So all your plans could go to a side and you hop into that show. But if, for instance, that doesn't happen, I was thinking about doing like a hypertrophy block. There's a lot of things I want to do. So So I need to get through my next block, and then I can figure out. But I was thinking about working with like a bodybuilding coach for like 2 days a week to work on my posterior chain. You mentioned my glutes could need some work, especially on locking out the deadlift today. So that's something that I've even had in my back of my mind for a while. So I was even thinking about incorporating that, a lot of posterior chain work to increase that. But I always knew my posterior chain wasn't there. I used to deadlift and someone was like, Nick, use your hamstrings. I'm like, well, I don't have hamstrings. I was all quad dominant, so I can't use my hamstrings when I don't have hamstrings. So so that's what I was thinking kind of going forward.
Well, I love what you said just there, because you said there's a lot of things that you want to do, right? Because that's every strength athlete in every sport. When you're younger and when you're coming up, you just do those things. Mm-hmm. You don't think about it and process it. So this glute hamstring thing you're thinking about and you're processing. When did you first start thinking, just out of curiosity, when did you first start thinking about this?
I think it was probably in 2019 when I was working with Terry. Terry said I had Hank Hill butt.
Yeah. I mean, recently though, right? Recently, when did you start thinking about maybe you might want to go into a hypertrophy phase?
Just when I was thinking about just kind of just general growth. So since I've been a heavyweight.
Okay. So how long ago?
So when I saw October is going into November is when that's why I made the announcement going to heavyweight. I wanted to focus on the Arnold, so I was really kind of focused. But so probably since March on.
Okay, that's my point, right? Mm-hmm. Is younger strength athletes, we get an idea, we do it. You've had this idea since March, right? And you're thinking, it's not that you're unwilling or lazy or any of the other kind of stuff. You're trying to figure out when to strategically put it in to where it's going to make the most amount of sense that's going to yield the highest result. Mm-hmm. And that's been since March. So March, April, May, June, like 4 months. Mm-hmm. You see the difference between how a pro is going to look at something and then how the amateur is going to think, I need hypertrophy. And then gets on the phone or finds a coach and starts it the next week, because they're not thinking. Because the reason why you're thinking about it is you're also thinking about all the negative things that could potentially happen if you put it in.
Sure.
Right. So walk me through that, right? Because you could very easily just say, okay, I'm going to do a 3-month hypertrophy phase next week. And you come to that decision. While that's going on, what are the things that are going to be put on the back seat that would concern you?
So I wouldn't be focused on like, let's say like overhead strength and working on almost, if you're doing a lot of hypertrophy, I'm going to start getting pretty immobile and unflexible, right? And you need a certain level of flexibility and mobility within the sport, especially if I'm going to start split jerking. So when I started kind of breaking out the split jerks recently, it took me a while. Like my rack position still hasn't really come back towards where I was. So now I need like 225 on the bar in order to have that right rack position. But that used to never be a really problem, but not until I start putting it on the mass. And then right now, kind of aerobically. So I think my conditioning is good, but it can always be better. But I was focusing on just carbo loading, putting on weight, putting on tissue. That's gone on to the side. So, But I think in this phase of like my first year of committing to be a heavyweight, it's got to be more hypertrophy and growth compared to aerobic strength training and like technique training.
Yeah. So it's that what I wanted to pull out of you was that balance, the yin yang, just trying to figure this out. Because first off, everybody has it. Some people feel guilty because they always think that they're not doing the right things. Hell, you probably think it now. Like you're not doing the right things. It's just part of it. And then you always think how did Poliquin used to say this? The best program is probably the program that you're not doing, right? And that fucks with your head so bad, right? Because you don't know what it's going to be, but you don't want to be so, when you just do shit for no reason. The word's not coming to my head right now. It's when you impulsive. You don't want to be so impulsive that it fucks all these other things up without thinking it all through. And that's how smart training gets laid out, right? Let's take a bathroom break real quick because I'm about ready to explode.
All right.
The Swiss Symposium 2023. Yes, we are bringing this back to Columbus again. The date is October 20 and 21, Columbus, Ohio. Hilton, it's the same location it was last year. If you head over to the website, there's a big banner that links directly to Swiss. There's also a link in the description box so you can see who the presenters are as we are booking them for the symposium. The symposium's been going on for 20 years. It's, in my opinion, probably a little biased, but in my opinion, one of the best symposiums when it comes to strength and conditioning, sport medicine, therapy, physical therapy. Right now, the admission is 38% off or 48% off. Don't know. I'm not looking. I'm just kind of looking at the camera right now, but it's the early bird rate. That rate is until July 1st. So now is the best time for you to sign up. When you go to register, there's 3 different ways that you can register for the symposium. There's the general admission, which gets you into all the different lectures that you want to go to. The caveat is there's 3 or 4 lectures going on at the same time. So the second option allows you to purchase the videos of all the lectures for you to be able to watch at a later time. So that allows you and gives you access to everybody that's presenting if there's 2 people presenting at the same time that you would really like to see. The format that those are in is, it's a streaming service. So it's if you've ever purchased a training course from anybody before, it's very similar to that. So you log in and then there's all the presentations that are there. You just click, you watch, you stream. It's how it works. The third option is the VIP option. And included in that is the Sunday after the symposium. A limited number of people will be coming out to our gym, the S5 compound at Elite FTS, with a handful, maybe a little bit more of the presenters that are there, just to train, to hang out, have some barbecue, have a good time. And that, again, is limited on the attendance. It's already 50% sold out, or 50% of the spots left, depending on how you want to look at it. Go to the link in the description. We'll have more information about the Swiss throughout the podcast as we move forward. We have a lot of the presenters booked for the podcast, so we'll be talking more about it. We'll see you there. As I want to call out the limited edition apparel, the link is in the description. As I've spoken about before, the limited edition apparel is apparel that I basically come up with. So some of the designs suck, some of them not so much. It's a weird thing. The ones that I think are going to do really well usually don't. The ones that I think aren't going to do really well do really well. Either way, they're all limited runs, so it changes, every single month. But all limited edition items are tri-blend material with, the cut that everybody wants now that's a little bit tighter on their arms so they can show off how big their fucking arms are. The limited edition items directly support the podcast. So head over, pick up your shirt today. could be a hoodie, could be shorts. We got these ball hugger shorts right now, which I would never wear, but I was told they were super popular. But you know what? They were wrong, because they're still sitting there, and I probably should discount them right now. Anyhow, if you want to see the discount on the ball hugger shorts, head over to the limited edition apparel, link in the description box. All right, so we'll just jump back in. When you do the seminars, have they all been overhead pressing based?
So I introduced a new seminar. First, the overhead seminar is win the press, win the show. The second seminar is didn't win the press, be good at these events so you can win the show and learn how to do other good things too. So I kind of ripped it off from Zoolander. But that's like my yoke, farmers, truck pull, and stones, but more importantly, like lapping theory. So talking about you're always lapping different things in strongman. So that can be applied to like 5 or 6 different events, even like 12 events if you're really going to count each particular event. But if you nail down those 4 or 5 events, you're going to be a very successful strongman. So I have my pressing, and then I have my everything else seminar.
All right. So if it's the pressing seminar, what's that look like? So what's the outline look like?
So I'm a big, what's funny is I just got stuck into like the PowerPoint presentations. I feel like PowerPoint presentations is how I can articulate my thoughts the best. So I have a PowerPoint slide, which I go 90 minutes. So I talk about importance of the hips. I talk about cleans. I go into strict press, push press, all the different type of jerks, and then I go implement specific notes. And then I also talk about competition theory, 1 rep maxes, and then a few other items when it comes to competition days and things to think about, and then just different anecdotal items I've learned over the years to kind of teach people in the seminars. So after the 90 minutes, I do hands-on for about 2.5 hours, and then I do a question and answer. But I also do sometimes I'll let the kids, or my campers, I like to call them now.
Okay.
I'll let them vote for what they want me to do. So I'll go like a 90% on a certain event, and I'll demonstrate it for them. So if they want me to do a heavy log, when I went to Sacramento, I go, what do you guys want me to do? I'm gonna go pretty heavy on something. Like, you guys choose. They go max Tsunami Bar press. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
So I did a max Tsunami Bar press, and I hit 429 over there on the floppy level 5. So that was wild. But I wouldn't have done it if they didn't vote for it.
No, I kind of like that though, because I think that one thing, and when you were at TPS, this may have been there. There's a lot that you can learn by watching other people train who are better than you. Mm-hmm. Just as far as rest periods, how they approach the bar, how they don't approach the bar, and how people do it all differently. So the fact that they can see you do something heavy, they're learning a lot from that without them even knowing they're learning a lot from that.
Well, it's everything I preached, right? I want to do what I preached in the whole 4 hours leading up to it. Now
with the press though, I wonder is, because you're teaching different presses, how do you go about doing that and not confusing the living hell out of them? Because there's different styles.
Sure. So I think I kind of just go over kind of like the basics, kind of the fundamentals. Sometimes the gold standard is like what you're looking to achieve, and let them know that it could take 6 to 12 weeks to achieve a certain form that they're looking to do, if that's very kind of important for them. So I kind of go out to the fundamentals, what I mentioned earlier in the podcast. I think a great strongman has a great strict press, push press, and split jerk. So between those 3, they're going to be ready for any kind of situation that in any contest. Again, if it's going to be reps, medleys, or a max. And then even though there's different forms and nuances, I usually like to teach the kind of like the longer form. So like, for instance, like the very specific form, and then come competition time, they can scale it down. And then if they need to be faster for, like, let's say they're doing reps or they have a medley going on, but I'd rather teach the more advanced form, and then they can scale it back rather than teach the basic form and then they have to scale it forward on their own.
Do you recommend or have a way when you present this stuff that they physically implement them into, say, a 12-week program? So they start with this press, then this press, then this press, or is it all kind of done at the same time?
I think it depends on where they are as an athlete. So if they're a beginner, they probably should play around with all of them. They could start with they could have one day where they're doing push press and strict press, and then they could do just jerks on another day. I think pressing twice a week is just fine, but usually by the end of the seminar, I give them press or not, or I give them like specific advice for that particular athlete. Like sometimes I've noticed that their hips are not strong enough, or they're not really activating certain items in their body in order to hit the press. So I give them specific recommendations to work on going forward, depending on their goals and what I learned about them that day.
How do you personally cycle the press? First off, I think you've only had, if I remember this right, 2 opportunities to actually display your overhead max press. How do you physically structure it in such a way that it goes from a strict press to the clean press over a period of time?
Sure. So I guess the best way to kind of explain that answer is just where I'm at right now. So kind of since I'm in the strength building phase, I'm probably gonna be no more strict press. I would say push presses and split jerks are harder on the body, so I'm probably gonna save those closer to competition. But I've done a long strict press phase probably since let's just say since March. So I'm probably gonna move on to push press in this next block.
Now, as you're getting bigger, because you mentioned the mobility a little earlier, as you're getting bigger, what are you doing to try to maintain the mobility to be able to maintain those positions?
I gotta be diligent. I gotta do stretching. I gotta do the proper warm ups, and then I gotta do my best. Usually, there's kind of the bigger I get, it's kind of I'm getting, I guess, less returns in terms of my mobility. But I just had to be kind of diligent until I'm at a point where I can really focus it more by just having some work towards it, but not totally ignoring it and during like a growth and strength phase.
Does it go through your head that the heavier weight's going to be racked anyhow? It just takes more weight to get you there.
Well, yeah, it's just I think just for the most part, it's just being diligent. Yeah.
No, it's the reason I'm saying that is there was a time when we were all so tight, right, and bound that just getting a barbell to touch our chest on the bench it's stupid looking back, right? It's just dumb as fuck. But at the time, it was like a badge of honor. Like, I finally got it. I'm so tight. I can't even touch my chest unless there's 135 on the bar. Where you think back, like, it's so fucking stupid, But it's like, it doesn't matter, right? As long as it touches with the weight that I need to touch, and who cares, But I'm probably not the best.
No.
But I can see the racking position as your arms get bigger, shoulders get bigger. It's gonna be tough,
especially the biceps. So yeah, as the biceps got bigger, I realized, especially just sitting on top of the bicep. You can see the camera.
Yeah, I know. Like, what do you not train biceps? I mean, what's the answer there?
I don't know if you ever watched back in the World's Strongest Man days or the old school ones, but Titus Lalas, he used to be like a 5'11" strong man weighing like 315 pounds, but he had like 23 and a half inch
I know who you're talking about.
biceps. I had him on a podcast and I was asking him like, oh, your biceps are so big. Like, how do you get your biceps so strong? He's like, actually, I probably train biceps too much. He's like, a good strong man should probably have probably like above average to mid-size biceps, because if they're too big, they're going to be more prone to bicep tears and mobility issues. So you want to have strong bicep tendons, but you don't want to have big biceps. So that's the advice that he gave me. But at the time, I had an interview right when I started the gaining process for heavyweight. I was like, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted to hear, but I guess I'm hearing it from the best, a former Arnold champion.
Yeah, so but he had 23-inch arms at the same time.
Yeah. I think I'm like 19. I think I'm like 19. But I don't know. I think we'll see. I'll be happy if I got to like 20. That's like Mark McGuire. I think he's 20-inch.
Was it really that big?
I think so. Yeah. That's what I remember back in the day. Him and Sammy Sosa.
No, I definitely remember that. I remember watching it, watching them battle back and forth and stuff like that. But I don't remember their forearms were bigger than hell.
Yeah, they were.
But I don't remember the biceps. I'm interested now to know. I believe it. I mean, because both of them, they're.
You need a Jamie to look to.
Yeah, I know.
Look
look the stats up to be able to see and go from there. You mentioned earlier the Tsunami Bar, and I got so many questions about this, right? Because when it first came out, the noodle bar. I mean, you've had to have more criticism than we've
absolutely.
had.
I've gotten it from all angles.
From all angles. So I want to talk about the criticism first, because that's the funniest part, right? Is because the bar flexes like a lot. And you were an earlier adopter to it. And so tell me about some of the dumb comments that you were getting. It just
they were saying that it looks easier than a regular bar because of the oscillation. That like you're able to do more weight because of the oscillation.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, so that was comical. I even had like fellow pro friends come visit me and they refused to use it because of like they just think it's a ridiculous thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's some of the other ones? I think it just I think a lot of it just like use a real bar. This is not strength training. You're a piece of shit. I'm like, well,
of course. I mean, that's normal. What made you want to use it in the first place?
I think first it was just messing around with it, and then I started seeing like kind of the benefits. So I think the first thing I realized is that if I needed to keep that oscillation pattern going the right way, I had to be perfect in my form. Like you can get away with barbell being a little off if you're forward or backwards on, let's just say, an overhead press. But with the Tsunami Bar, if you're going pretty heavy weight and you're off by an inch, it's gonna humble you. It's gonna oscillate the wrong way. So in order to be in that right groove, you gotta be doing everything perfect. So it was a great form recognition or form reinforcement at first. And then the second piece I started seeing is that I started noticing when I spent, especially when lighter and when higher reps, I started building the speed to it, being able to really press it pretty fast, but not only fast for myself, but faster than my fellow competitors. So like my push press was just lightning ahead of my other competitors. So I started seeing that speed aspect. And now lately, and actually what I did here today is a thing where I'm combining not only the speed but lockout strength. So using the oscillation to work the overhead lockout. So I would press it and then hold the bar for 3 seconds. And when I hold the bar for 3 seconds, it wobbles 1, 2, 3. So it's almost, so you're almost getting the lockout work of one press. And then again I would work on the speed press. And then punch it out again, and then it will oscillate 1, 2, 3. So I'm really fatiguing the lockout position more than if I use a standard barbell. So so those are the only applications that I've learned I would say that I've done as of late, the most common. But I'm always learning more about it, like finding new things to work on. I'm starting to use it more on like front squats, but just the variable load training. It's just something that's very kind of dynamic and something that, again, it's great for stability, and depending where you are in your program, it could be a huge benefit.
It's interesting that you say with the overhead press, with the lockout position. It's one of the things that I've used it for, and will use it for if I start to notice my stability, my core stability.
So did you bench with it?
I do, but I'll squat with it probably more than I bench with it. No, I bench with it more. Equal. The different reasons. When I bench with it, it would be in replace of my light bench day. Sure. I guess, like, what if I don't really call it speed anymore? It's just the light bench day. When I squat with it, I can't grab the bar, so I got to use the spud little harness thing that goes around. So it's like a Hatfield bar strap that goes on the bar. So I hold it here. But the first time I ever squatted with it, it's the only free squats I really do, but close stance, I go down, then, I come up as fast as I can, then I'll hold it. And my hamstrings were so freaking sore the next day. And I think it's because your hamstrings, they're like being pulled apart as it goes up. But when I'll squat up with it and hold it, I'll count like 1, 2, 3. I don't know what this is really, maybe 3 or 4 times, but while I'm holding it, I'm rooting the ground as hard as I can with my feet. I'm keeping my core as hard as I can because it's throwing you around. And for me, that works my core more than freaking anything. And it doesn't take a lot of weight with that. How
much weight are you using?
I think the most I've ever used with that might be 245s per side, and that was really unnecessary for what I was doing. Just the stability is all I'm really looking for.
Sure.
Like a plate per side is enough. You're using like 6 plates per side and crazy shit like that.
I've only did that once, but that was quite the squat.
Well, the squat's interesting because when you do come up with it real hard like that, you need a bail system, right? Because like you said, if it's only so forgiving, right? So if it's you need to be able to step the hell out, like, or you're going to go over, you know? So I found that real quick with the squat. With the bench, I don't notice as much at that lockout position as I do just getting a different stretch in the bottom. I guess is the best way to relate that, because people will try to compare that to, say, a bamboo bar, and they're completely different things. You know, the one thing, you got to put the kettlebells on and attach it.
You know what's funny about the bamboo bar? Of course, somebody they call it the earthquake bar. The Tsunami Bar in the earthquake bar, they're like, I call them natural disaster bars. So it has to be like a natural disaster in order to be a bar. But I always said the earthquake bar always shakes kind of like back and forth, where the Tsunami Bar is more kind of up and down. Yeah. So I think they're both good tools, but I think it really depends on when you're working. But I feel like sometimes the Tsunami Bar, you do get the back and forth motion too, especially like you're talking about on squats.
Big time. When
you walk that out, and even coming out of the hole, it is pushing you back and forth.
Do you keep it in? Because you use it a lot, you use it way more than what I use it. Do you keep it in all year round and just physically use it different ways?
Sometimes I'll do certain blocks with it. So it's usually an accessory movement. So sometimes it will be the third main, or either accessory or the third main exercise or something in a certain day. But funny fact, or fun fact, or whatever kind of fact you want to use, for my world records, it was always my finisher. So 8 days out, I would do a Tsunami Bar speed day, and it would be like the speed finisher for going into a max axle or max log. And that's why, and I also, on my dumbbell, I used that for all my records. And I was able to hit them, but I was always using the Tsunami Bar 8 days out.
So when you use it for the heavier lifts like that, are you trying to use the momentum out of the bottom? Basically catch the wave, I guess. I don't know what you
a little bit. So it's like not only strengthen up the dip and bend, but also put in the importance of creating separation with your body, be able to extend up. So being able to extend up as high as you can before trying to get under it, or if you're doing a push press, squeezing the glutes and firing the type.
I get it. Okay, so I get it. I get what you're saying now. Because some people use it and just use the momentum to their advantage, where you're still, your focus is more internally.
But also, like, for instance, like I was using it for like a speed day. So I was only maybe doing 198 or like 237 at most when I was focusing on like as those finishers, because I already was done with my working sets for that block leading into the contest. So when I was getting into that speed work, it's very similar to almost, let's just say, a sprinter running downhill. They're at a faster pace than they ever would be. So when I'm doing the Tsunami Bar, my bar speed is faster than I could do with the actual bar. So I was almost putting my body in a different motion. Let's just say even if you're doing reverse bands for deadlift out of the rack, that speed off the ground is gonna be much different than if you didn't have those bands. So it's almost like, again, of course it's speed work, but you're putting your body in a new place, because you're able to get to a different point in terms of speed, and then you're able to replicate that going forward on a regular.
Yeah, I like the downhill running example. I mean, that resonates. That kind of makes, at least I think it's going to make more sense to people when they hear that, because I try to find analogies for things like that. Yeah. And that's almost like the perfect analogy for that. When strongman has been a part of your life for a decade, and when did you meet your wife, by the way? Just
2018.
So 2018. So before her, and then wrestling before that. So training in some aspect has been a part of your life for over a decade, even further if you want to go back into high school and training and all the other stuff. So you've gone through different big phases of your life. So college and then graduating, marriage, I mean, big things, and maintain training at a high level throughout all that. I don't know if the word balance is the right way to look at it, but how has the priority of all this changed throughout those big, because you're not the same person that you were, you know, right out of college.
As long as you can plan things ahead, you can kind of pick your battles. So I knew, like, for instance, I'm not going to compete when I'm getting ready for my bachelor party and getting ready for my honeymoon and wedding. So that's like when I'm going to scale down on strongman. And then the minute that's over, then I can kind of ramp up. But knowing that I have other weddings and bachelor parties to attend in the fall, I want to get the work in now because later on in the year. So usually I think it's a lot of it's kind of like picking your battles and figure out what appropriate. So almost putting the puzzle piece together to have the most optimal year for your goals that you set to have. But along with of course hitting like the relationship goals and spending time with your family and work, and of course focusing on work, because a lot of times if you're as you know, if you're focused too much on training, sometimes you could be training but it's at a cost of family time or work time or some other goal that you might have.
And you don't work in the industry per se.
I do not.
So there is that balance of those pieces where you've been around the sport long enough to be able to know that a lot of strength athletes, I don't want to say they purposefully destruct their life, you know, but they let it, the sport, because the sport's not doing it, they're doing it to themselves, but they let it happen.
They're almost competing and training on borrowed time is
that, and they're okay with the rest of their life just going to hell, and then using the sport as the excuse for that going to hell. Where the thing I've always tried to reinforce and put out there is you still have time where you have to rest, right? So if, you know, it's you can learn stuff, you know, I've known people that won't go to college because of powerlifting. It's going to disrupt that. Like, well, what are you're only in the gym 12 hours a week. Like, what about all the other time?
Absolutely.
You know, there's a whole lot of time there. And then I've known other people that, you know, it's a double. Sometimes I think they use it as an excuse to be an asshole. Right. And because of that, it's like I couldn't work this job, which might have been the only first, I don't want to say real job, the first job that they had to where they could have grown. But then that didn't work because strongman, or that didn't work because of powerlifting. Sure. You know, they wanted me to fucking work, and I had, you know, strongman day on Saturday. Fuck that. And you find out later they only wanted them to work like one day out of a quarter.
Absolutely.
So, how I don't want to say how have you managed to not run into those positions, because potentially wrestling in college could have taught you how to manage sport, academic. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
All those other things.
I was, not to boast myself, I was a 2-time academic All-American. So focusing on grades and wrestling. So you did have a lot of it is balancing the schedule and planning ahead. I think the biggest thing is planning ahead. Just noting like what the big events are for that year or for that month, and then planning your workouts around it. Knowing that you have, let's just say, even coming out here, I knew that was potentially like traveling could be pretty taxing. I want to do a big lift out here, so I plan a deload going into this. So I put all my recovery time in the week before, so I would be nice and healthy coming into the podcast, into the training here at the gym. So I planned my life kind of around it, and I was able to, like, all right, I'll start this 3-week block beforehand. So it perfectly leads into what I want to do when I come to visit. That's actually, I'm sitting here right now. I deloaded for you.
I know, but it's crazy, man, because I'm sitting here right now because I'm sure you've been asked the question, like, how do you balance all this? Like, it's like a popular question whenever you're doing all this stuff. And I do exactly what you just said. I mean, I have, where is it here? Like, this is like my training mesocycle with what I want to accomplish going all the way to the end of the year. And in here, I have highlighted dates like, okay, I'm going to be on vacation here. This is going to be here. You know, I have a seminar here. There's a train your ass off here. And then my mesocycles are made around that. But where I'm kind of frustrated with myself right now is I've never told anybody that. And it's the simplest, maybe I just assumed everybody just does that, but they probably don't. Right. So then they end up on the shit end of the stick. Because then they end up like, well, fuck it, I can't do that. But you knew about it forever ago. I mean, it's in your case, we scheduled this like forever ago. You know, so it was a long time. It's when you're asked, how do you balance your life, and you put that out there, how well is that received?
I would say it's pretty much people kind of understand it. I think people think it's easier is more easier said than done. But I think sometimes I think it's much more common now. Like for instance, I've been like a little more successful in the sport, so it's like, oh, that's great. But I think when I was first telling people, like when I was trying to balance my schedule, like for instance, I was getting criticized by a couple of my college buddies because I wasn't going out on Friday nights because I want to have a big strongman Saturday. I'm like, you're choosing strongman over drinking, and then I'm like, well, I got to pick my battle. I can't have both. I can't. Well, I guess you could drink and have a great time and have a shitty workout, but my goal is to work out. So, and then I kind of realized that, of course, drinking but not celebrating wasn't as fun as celebrating and drinking a big win or something like that. So I started realizing that that's why I started picking the battles on this kind of on the smaller front. And then that kind of led towards planning out kind of further ahead of time. The only time that gets screwed up is injuries. Whenever you get injured, you're not looking month to month. You're not looking like far out into the schedule. You're almost thinking day to day or week to week. Because a lot of times, especially as a strength athlete, if you're injured, you got to figure out what's going on. When can you get back? How much time is going to take to recover? But anytime, like for instance, when I was banged up, I tried to double down on something else in my life. So I've had like one knee surgery. I had one like cyst removal, which I couldn't go to the gym for like 5 weeks. So I would double down on work. So sometimes, like for instance, the both full surgeries were scheduled. So I knew that I wasn't able to work out. So I'm like, I'm going to double down on work. So and I'm pure commission. So this is the time I'm going to really kind of focus in order to build some revenue for myself for the rest of the year. So when I'm really busy competing, I'm not going to be strained for cash and I have to spend a certain amount of time away from training because I need to build a living.
Is there seasonality built into your job?
There is. I would say you have like the first half of the year, and then right now the summer is very busy, but we'll see what come August. August is usually a big vacation month, so not only your clients but your candidates. I'm a recruiter, so clients and candidates usually go vacation in August, but then September picks up, and then it slows down after Thanksgiving, which is probably similar for most corporate jobs. So I also kind of plan around that in that sense too. But like for instance, in the past, like I've had the Arnold Classic is always in March, so busy time of the year is January and February. But I also have training for the Arnold, so I'm like spending a lot of time training. So sometimes those two conflict. I'm training for a competition, but I also need to really work. So sometimes I've had a bad balance, and I've learned from that in terms of really had to focus on one or two.
So when you say you've learned from, what have you changed with that?
I think a lot of it would just have to be, if I'm more mindful in terms of my rest, I'm able to kind of wake up earlier and get on the computer, get on the phones and start dialing in order to start recruiting and make money. But like, for instance, if I'm not doing a good job in terms of like meal prepping or everything like that, like I'll maybe sleep in later, I'll be too busy cooking and that takes away from work. I'm doing everything I need to do for training and feeding myself, but I'm not doing the other piece in terms of building my business and making deals.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Where I've heard other people that's when they'll start to implement recovery modalities, that they otherwise probably wouldn't do, but most of it is what you're saying is, meal prep and all this other kind of stuff is kind of a pain in the ass.
Sure
so
is.
If you don't have to do it, then you're not going to do it. You can just do it normally. But if you know that you're coming into a phase like that, then you need to double down and do it. Otherwise you're going to pay the price, because you're going to miss meals.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You know, but it's kind of good in a way too, because you don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to do it all year. So that's kind of cool. That's how I've always looked at it, because it's for me, the fourth quarter is a bitch. It's just a bitch.
Absolutely.
And
2 weeks out, that's question everything, and your body hurts.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to. It's always been that way. But and you'll know. So I try to keep the training goals I have away from the bigger e-commerce times.
Sure.
You know, and push them a little bit later. And so you figure it out is what you do. But unless you're laying it out, you can't figure it out, because you can't see it. And I think that's where a lot of people screw up, is they don't.
So for instance, we were talking about, you can only have so many 12-week preps in a year. If you put in a 12-week prep during, again, like the busiest time of your earning season, that's not really conducive. So sometimes you learn the hard way, but in the end, if you want to survive and you want to continue towards your goal, you're gonna have to adapt to the right schedule and the right planning.
Yeah, but some people say that's not hardcore.
No,
right?
that's not hardcore.
It's not hardcore. But then you'll last longer than what they do. You know, which is the other flip side of that. Because I think when you take on more than you can handle because of poor organization, I guess that's what we're saying, is organize better.
Yeah.
Right. If you have poor organization and you take on more than you can handle, then we know what the outcome's going to be. I mean, how can you think it's good? Right. But a lot do. You had a note here that, and it's, you know, we talked a little bit off camera to kind of get some clarity on that you want to talk a little bit about business in the strength industry.
Sure.
So where do you want to go with that?
Sure. So right now I've been in a process of course, recruiting is my main focus, but when I'm competing, I want to kind of continue building my brand in terms of putting out programs, doing seminars, doing content, doing meetups, and doing podcasts with great members like yourself. But eventually I want to ramp up and maybe have a gym one day and really have maybe a training business. So of course those are the ultimate goals, but I realized that having owning a gym or having a big business is not conducive to competing. I've seen different correlations where someone that has a gym and has a very, like I say, a strongman specific gym, usually sometimes they'll have decent years, but a lot of times, more often than not, gym owners are not the best, or not the podium guys or the guys that are winning the shows. They're usually doing pretty well because usually they have all the equipment, but they're not the best of the best. There's a few exceptions, of course, like I was saying. Like my good friend Eric Dawson, he's been able to win shows and be a business owner and of course be able to train clients at the same time. That I feel like owning a gym or owning a business in the strength industry is so consuming. So I imagine you probably have seen that, of course, seen that yourself. But I feel like it's very not only time consuming but energy consuming, and I feel like competing is almost a full-time job in its own.
It can be, and it's and I don't know if it's so much the strength industry. You know, I can say there's vast differences when I speak to entrepreneurs that are in the strength industry to those that are in different industries, where people who work in business sectors that are from the corporate world compared to those from the strength industry. You know, it's a little different. I think what happens is they start a business, but they don't really understand how much time that takes. You know, they don't know this is 100-hour-a-week job. You know, just owning your own business, that's all you ever think about is your own business from the time you get up till the time you go to bed. I don't think they factor that in, where, I mean, you being commissioned, that's kind of in that world, but still is, right? Because you don't get paid unless you sell. Sure. I mean, you get paid upon the result, where there's a lot of pros to that, but there's a lot of cons too.
Sure is.
You know, the cons that you don't sell, you don't get shit, you know, especially if it's commission only, and the other thing, I think that when the technician becomes the entrepreneur, then the technician doesn't know how to be an entrepreneur, and the technician doesn't know how to do entrepreneur or business work. So just because they love to train doesn't mean they're going to know how to run a gym. They're entirely two different skill sets. And I often wonder too that if if you're looking to make money in the industry and it's a subset of an industry, you should look at the demographic of the industry. Like, what is the demographic? Because that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what the upside is. If it's a very, very small demographic and it's an industry full of a lot of different people, I mean, you know this because you're a recruiter, right? Sure. You know, finding jobs for people that are in a very dense, high, you know, what am I looking for?
A niche space?
Well, yeah. There's not a lot of jobs for them, right? And if they are, they need to be really, really good to be able to last in that job. Meanwhile, there could be this other space over here that pays really, really well, probably better than this space, but maybe it's not what they want to do. You know, they're not looking in those different spaces. They think, man, if I had a gym, then I could train whatever I want, which is bullshit to begin with. But if I have a gym, I can train whatever I want. I can rest whenever I want, which is bullshit. You know, so they really, and that's most things in life, right? It's there's the grass is always greener. So,
and I imagine, like, for instance, like those gym owners, I feel like sometimes if they don't set boundaries, like, for instance, like,
yes.
if I'm training at this time, don't come up to me about work or
but that becomes a problem, right?
But you also need it, but you also, like, weapon, if you're in need of money, you need to do the right thing. So
yeah, and if you're doing that and these are your customers, then you're treating your customers like shit, and it's the first interaction that customers ever had with you, then you're a shitty business. you see, so it's there are people that are able to balance that in such a way that they can get through with that, but typically they need to be, the skill sets I think that they have to have are sales first off, because they need to be able to hire other people to do work. And you can't do that unless you have revenue to hire the other people to do the work. Otherwise they have to do all of the work. So they have to hire, you know, have the sales skills to bring in enough members to be able to, if it's a gym, you know, to be able to at least get to a point to where they can hire somebody else to do sales or, you know, whatever they're not good at. You know, it's basic business rules. Double down on what you're really good at, hire people to do the things you're not good at. Where in that gym industry, a lot of things go wrong in the fitness industry that I've seen. And it's, the first thing is they pay themselves too fast. And I understand the philosophy of pay yourself first. I get that. But if you're trying to build a business, the money you put back in the business is how you build the business, which means you may not make any money for a long time. So what's the other revenue source to be able to do that? So as soon as revenue starts coming in, they just start.
How long did you start, when you started Elite, when did you start paying yourself?
7 years.
7 years. Wow.
7 years. And then it stayed at a set salary, which wasn't great for, they're all based on tax brackets, right? So it was right under like the middle tax bracket or whatever it was at the time. It stayed there for a long time, like another 7 years. And then it went up to whatever the next tax bracket was. And it's been there ever since. Then everything else goes back in, where it becomes this another side of the issue. It's like, at what point do you stop putting so much back in? Because you want it to grow. It's like your strongman, like a bench. You want it to grow as much as you can, which takes money to feed it and water it. And anything that you pay yourself is just taking away from that ability to grow, which becomes this other mess that from, I know people that manage it very well, and then they just live at a lifestyle that is conducive to being able to pay their bills and all, while still growing the business. Most businesses, you know, most businesses run into problems because the owners, whoever it is, are living in a lifestyle they can't afford. I mean, most people have financial problems because they live at lifestyles they can't afford. Well, the business does that, then the business crumbles, not because it didn't have the revenue, but because the owners were just paying it all to themselves. And so they can't build from there. Now there's a whole other sector where if you go with the online, you know, now your expenses, you know, are lower, but now you got to figure out how to manage your time.
Interesting. Yeah, those are all great facts. So if you had to put yourself in my shoes, I'm still competing. Would you want to start a business where you're in the peak of your?
No.
No.
I mean, Louis told me this.
Oh,
but
I love Louis advice.
Yeah, he told me a lot of things that I thought were bullshit at the time, but ends up being right. Which is fucked up, right? And one of them was don't start a business till you're done competing. All this other kind of stuff. And it's weird because he helped me start it. So it's like this crazy type of thing. But I knew, and there was no doubt I was on the ass end, my career anyhow. But where the advice that comes with that advice was you can still do all the background work required to build the brand, build the name, and all the other stuff. That's just staying vocal, doing the podcast, keeping all that out there. So when you can commit the time to do what you want to do, you already took the 7 years I had to take before I could pay myself, and I already put it in there. You see what I'm saying? Because either way, I think that work still needs done for longevity. And this industry, the strength industry, whatever you want to call this industry, there's a lot of fake posers that are out there, which make people think that they can make more than they really can doing certain things. And the only ones that really do well are the ones that last. Because the only reason why I assume you would want to get in the industry and do this is because you love it and you want it to be part of your life,
the passion
for the rest of your life, right? And it can be part of your life for the rest of your life, but some people try to chase this $1 million a year bullshit dream, and then they're done in 3 years. It's like, why don't you just, when they're in it, why don't you just build, slowly over a period of time, like you have to do with 37, 39 competitions over 10 years, slowly over a period of time to where you have a solid base and a solid foundation that if a pandemic comes around, it's not going to wreck you. If the other things come around, it's not going to wreck you. You may not make as much at the higher end, but there's no guarantee there anyhow. So just build the solid foundation, then build something that you can do forever. And then that's the advice I give to anybody. And I mean, with that doesn't change a whole lot. You just keep the name out there, keep it known. But I would be more, if it were me, I would be very more, I would find metrics to track if what I was doing was building the brand or not. Because you can wrap yourself up into posting on 5 different social media accounts, doing a weekly podcast, and now all of a sudden you're doing like 12 hours a week of all this other stuff. And is it building any traction or not? Because maybe it doesn't take all that. Maybe half the things that you're doing aren't working, right? And you don't know if it works or doesn't work until you put in enough time to really know that.
So in 2023, what's the best metric? Would it be dollars, or would it be audience, or would it be followers? Or
I'd say for what you're talking about, it would be audience. And followers are weird. You have to first define audience and how you want to define audience, because followers can fall on an algorithm, which can change just based because maybe a Tsunami Bar press catches something, right? And then you gain, 10,000 followers, which aren't really potential future customers. I'm still old school in such a way that I use an email list to determine, because they had to do something, commit something, they're emailed to a list, which means they care more than the person that's just going to see a social media post. I'm older. I mean, that's why you see, that may not necessarily be true, but followers were always, and we track all kinds of metrics, and then we narrow them down. So we'll start wide, narrow down to the ones that matter. So I guess that would be the advice, is I track every metric associated that you think can have a difference. You got a business degree, so you know some of them are pretty easy just to wax those, and then track them on an Excel sheet and see, is this having the impact that you want, which is growing the personal brand. Growing the personal brand. And if it doesn't, then you just do less of that one and you do more of the other one, and just manage that way. The one metric that you could go off of is definitely the seminars. Because if people are coming and paying for a seminar, that's your biggest fan.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And then what are the referrals? How do you build referrals from that? How do you build relationships from that? and go from there. I started doing seminars. If you really want to go way back, that's what it was. And most of them, I didn't make any money. It was just a break even deal, but it still is a great way to refine your coaching skills. Because you know this, they're people you've never worked with before.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes you're like, oh, fuck, like, what am I going to do? I mean, you get stumped.
Especially the Q&A, you get some really good curveballs. And the one thing I'm not really great with is I was able to adopt a lot of good, let's say for just pressing, a lot of good habits early on. So I never really had any overhead injuries. Like, what do you do on an overhead press if you have a shoulder impingement? I'm like, I've never really experienced that. So I try to do my best, but a lot of times you go see a PT and get that fixed because a lot of times it just imbalances.
Well, those opportunities to be able to field those questions are great, right? Because you just be honest, you don't know, but then you're going to go look it up. You know, then you'll be able to see then over a period of time that resource becomes better and better and better with that. And Strongman's got a lot of eyes on it.
Sure does.
Hell, even the 105s have started whatever, what is that, lightweight?
Middleweights.
Middleweight. They got a lot of eyes on it now that wasn't there even 5 years ago. Something post-pandemic has put a lot of eyes. They've always been on the world, you know, the supers or whatever you want to. It's always been there. More eyes are starting to come to the other divisions too.
I think I'm the third 105 you've had on the podcast. You had Bromley, and of course you had Clayton. Yeah.
And the cool thing with yours, I think Clayton may have retired, may not have retired. Who knows? I think he's done it several times, but people love a story, man. So right now you're in the process of moving up into the heavies. That's a story in itself.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
People do love that.
That's what you want to put out there. You want to put out that story so they can follow. Because shit, we could be sitting down 4 years from now and you just won the world's strongest man. You're 330 pounds. You can't breathe for shit and you got no hair left, which we don't want, right? Yeah. You don't want that because your hair's great.
Thank you.
Well, I've seen comments.
Do you guys hear that?
I saw when I was going through your stuff, there was that came up often. This guy's got great hair.
I've lucked out. My dad's bald, so.
Oh shit, it's coming.
So, well, I don't know. Maybe it skipped a gene because my grandfather had a head of hair. And he's 88. Yeah. So I think I skipped a generation. Yeah. So, but I guess my kids will be bald.
And staying on that topic of life events coming in while you're still competing, how is you got married like not even a year ago, right?
No. Now it's 6 weeks.
6 weeks?
Yeah, it was June 3rd was the wedding, so it's
6 weeks. It's not even a year, so it's just recently.
Oh yeah.
So how long were you guys dating before that?
5 years.
Okay.
So we got married at the 5 year mark.
All right. So go back to when you guys got serious. How did that change as far as your training and everything?
Sure. So I was traveling back and forth. I like mainly staying at her place, but I wasn't getting like the proper rest. And you're in that honeymoon phase when you first meet someone, so you're going out, you're getting expensive dinners. And also, I guess my training did take a hit a little bit, but I was happier as a person because I met the love of my life. So I think there was benefits on both sides. But when it comes to kind of rest and diet, it wasn't great. I think my body composition wasn't great by the end of like 2018. And then she started cooking for me. I think I started kind of trimming down a little bit. So I think a lot of it was an adjustment. But like for at least the first 4 or 5 months, it wasn't conducive to training, but it was conducive to my life goals.
Was she supportive with? Does she know the strongman before?
Oh, I think that was the first date. I think I went over the top on the first date. I did most of the talking. Yeah. She can even tell you that she didn't really talk much the first date, but I pretty much was like, oh, I want to be world's strongest man. I want to do this and that. I even want to be an actor one day. I don't think I want to do Hollywood anymore. But again, I tell you, I'm delusional. So I had like those goals in mind. I want to do this and that. So I think I even say this on my sales calls, even when I'm helping out like younger recruiters. I set the expectations like really early on in the relationship. Like, this is who I am. This is what I do. And our first trip together was America's Strongest Man 2018. And we went to like Long Beach in California and went and did a trip in San Diego that whole trip. So she got to see all of it. She got to see the community. I think she supports everything I do. She doesn't do strong women, but she's into fitness, and of course, she does more of the gen pop lifting, and she's really into that right now.
Well, so I think there's advantages that can come with that, though, too. You know, I think there's, I got to tread water carefully here. I've perceived more problems when there's two people in the relationship both competing at high levels in sport compared to when it's one person's full all in type passion, or as all in as it can be, and the other one, it's they're familiar with it, they understand it, they know the pros and the cons, right? Because if she's been around for 5 years, she knows all the good and all the bullshit that's associated with it. So she knows both, right? That I kind of think is necessary. When they don't know any of the good nor the bad, and they're just completely out of the loop, that can be a problem too. Sure. That might be a bigger problem than the one that actually competes all the time. But it's that middle. To me, I think that middle ground, my perception is that's the perfect ground, for the other person in the relationship. Like if one's all in with something, that right there is enough to understand the stupid shit, right? To be to be an enabler, but not as much as what your buddies are going to be, right? But an enabler, but also enough to be a realist, to say, you know what, this might be a little fucked up, or you're going to say, you know what, shut up, whatever, I'm doing what I'm going to do. But at least you're going to pause and think about it because of that. When the understanding isn't there, then sometimes that just becomes all disconnected.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen it in different situations and other relationships, but I think I just got to get very lucky finding the right woman. Yeah.
When you look at, I'm going back to the All-American thing because that I didn't figure out. Because when you have the collegiate athletes, the grades as well, when you look at other people that have businesses in the sport, where do you see the problems? Because you're around business, you're around recruiters, you're around, people you're trying to, are you working with the employees or the employers, or both?
Both.
Both. Okay. So you're working with both, right? So you're hearing from the employers, I need, what a weird place you're in right now. Right? And coming from that world, looking into where do you see some of the disconnects that could be better?
So we were talking about like within like the strength sports and businesses. Well, there's some guy. I would say there's some gyms and businesses that do it well. I think some that don't, but I think it's pretty much almost going back to the themes that we were talking about earlier. Just good planning and good realistic goals going forward. I think sometimes individuals that try to scale up too fast usually crash and burn. But if they have a good growth idea or of course, a solid vision of what they want to do, usually they do pretty well. Most businesses, like 9 out of 10 businesses fail in the first 3 years. So I think the best ones have a strategic vision and also realistic expectations of where the business is going to go. Not that it's going to be the next best thing since sliced bread. Yeah. Let's
stay on that topic, because the strategic vision is important, because it's to a lot of people, that's just, I got this idea in my head and I want to do this. And that's the vision. It's not, when you say strategic, how would you define strategic as far as a vision for business?
X amount of revenue, X amount of employees by the end of the year. And of course, dedicating a certain part of your life to the business. Basically
a written plan with metrics.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. It's why I put that out there, because it's as soon as I could pay myself, the first thing I did was hire a company to help teach me how to run business. So it was based in the E-Myth methodology. And I grew up, both my grandparents had a family business. I grew up in a family business. So I grew up.
What was the family business?
On one side, it was ice cream. And then on the other side, it was appliances. My parents was appliances, so small business. So I grew up around small business environment, and I never wanted to do it. Just, I've seen it. It's like, no, anything but, here I am, so that things work out weird ways. But you learn though too, like maybe here's some boundaries I need to set. Here's some other things I have to set. And so I already had a background kind of knowing what to expect, where one of the first things that they had me do was to create a strategic objective. Like, where do you see the business in 4 years? Like, well, no, you need to write it down. And then when you write it down, we're going to dissect what you write and we're going to find metrics that we can track. Like how many employees, revenue, those are easy metrics. Good customer service. Well, how do you, 20 years, how do you measure that 20 years ago? I don't know. Let's use a scale. This is their words. That's fine. We'll just use a scale of 1 to 5. Then you track each month. Am I at 4? Am I at 3? So it's, all these metrics are being tracked, and then here's where it's supposed to be, in 4 years, where I don't know if when I speak to people today, 4 years is too long. They can't grasp it. So it's 2 is more. I could grasp the 4 years. I think our attention spans are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller as they're kind of getting through, which is weird to me because sometimes I'll play the backwards card and say, do you remember the pandemic? Like, oh, hell yeah. You understand that was 3 years ago. And people are like, what the fuck, man? That was like yesterday. That's because 3 years go by faster than you think. So now 4 years isn't that far. You see, so it's, you anchor things a little bit. And that was probably out of everything I did, working with them for the 4 years was probably the best thing I did, because it gave me trackable indicators that I could just put on an Excel spreadsheet. I didn't even have QuickBooks or any of this shit, nothing at the time. It's just accounting was done with, people would call and I'd write the invoice and then I'd had a fucking spreadsheet, log, accounting log, crazy ass shit.
Now, did hiring that company, did it keep you more accountable to what you had to do every day if you didn't hire them?
Yes, but there was so much. I was still training people too. So there was this stuff, back and forth going on there. So there was that. What it made me, the accountability wasn't going to be a problem, because I kind of knew what it was and where I wanted to go, and that it was going to take all my time to do it. That wasn't the problem. The accountability with the things I didn't like, that was the problem.
Sure.
Right. So there were certain modules, like management and leadership were modules I didn't like. I'd rather not do that, which is fucked up because it's like the most important part of what I have to do. But I'd rather not, because that involves conversations you may not want to have, communication skills that probably need, especially with me back then, communication skills that really had to change, because this way of communication isn't going to work. And I remember the financial module too. Hated that. And then I didn't understand it, because by that time I had QuickBooks. I'm like, why am I learning how to fucking do, accounting on index cards? Like, this is ridiculous. I just log it and it goes right there, and it's set all up. But I'm glad I did, right? Because then I think I learned a better knowledge of, what a liability, the basic fundamentals of accounting. And then instead of just relying on QuickBooks or an employee to be able to say that, because as a business owner, I think you need to have all these. You need to have at least basic business one-on-one knowledge in each attribute of business, or you're going to get fucked.
Sure.
There is going to be a consultant that is going to come that is going to fuck you over. That's a big part of business. Avoiding that is a huge part of business.
But it sounded like you're of course, you're 7 years in, but you're still building the foundation for today. Yes. So it all comes down to
it never stops.
Always learning, yeah.
Well, it's like, this is the why I wrote the book Under the Bar, I guess, as well, is everything I've learned in the gym is transferred to business. So it's a part of the whole thing is not just building the foundation, but what are you building to protect the foundation? Like, is it a moat? Is it a wall with a moat? Like, what is in there? Because people are going to try to rip you off. There's all kinds of things that can happen. Sued. There's all this shit can happen, and they will. They undoubtedly they will, and they can financially fuck you if you're not ready for it.
Sure.
I mean, one lawsuit comes through that insurance doesn't happen to protect, and you're not ready, and you haven't thought this through. You're crushed. You're done. You can't afford the legal fees. So it's this kind of shit plays into that, but it's the same thing. Like, well, when you're training, here's my vulnerability. So I need to hide it, the best I can. I need to train around it. I need to make it stronger. maybe I don't need to make it a strong point, but I have to at least make it so it doesn't break. Back broke. Okay, why? Right? Because you could have just, it was more your SI and your hip, I believe, right?
Yes.
So you just assume it's this, but you didn't look at exactly why it was that, where it would have kept reoccurring.
It did reoccur. It took me months to figure out, but that's a
you
good analogy. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Where if you just assume that's what it is and you just move forward, that vulnerability is still there. So I knew from getting hurt and all these other things, the first assumption is not right, you know, and the gut reaction might be right, but think, you know, all these things that you do in training that you look back on that we talked about earlier that you don't do now that you did younger, man, they're so vital when you apply it, not just in business, but life, everything. You know, do you need to run your mouth right now, or should you think about it? You know,
more times than not, you shouldn't run your mouth.
Yeah, exactly. But some, you know, some do, and then it's a crazy type of thing. Were there any topics that you wanted to discuss that I didn't bring up? Oh, Murph, we got to talk about Murph. We cannot not talk about
Murph. I think the lore around Murph, especially early on, is that it was kind of like this big, bad, tough gym owner in Everett. And Everett's like I would say kind of like an industrial area, pretty like tough, a little bit tough neighborhood, but it's also home of like the D1 Massachusetts state champions for like 10 years running at one point. So Everett was always like it was always a pretty cool place. But I remember, now if I have my facts right, so I think Murph was a prison guard at one point. So he's like, yeah, he's a prison guard, and he's really mean to all the members, but everybody loves him. I'm like, all right, like it's like I guess I gotta train here. I gotta check it out. And like for instance, if you drop the bar too much, or if you left weights, he was screaming across the gym. And it was funny. We bumped heads a little bit at first, but he was actually like the first person that supported me or believed in me. I think a couple months into training, he goes up and he says, "You could be world's strongest man one day, but your form is awful." He's like, "You're gonna need to come train with me." And I was pretty not hot-headed, but I was pretty stubborn at the time, still stubborn to this day. But I didn't really know how to react, but I was like, it's like, I guess that's right, but I'm still not going to work with Murph. But indirectly, Murph probably taught me like everything, because everybody that he taught me. So there was, of course, a powerlifting coach named Russ Smith, who's still there that day. He helped me, of course, he not only helped me like deadlifting, but helped me work into a suit. And I learned other things like GHRs and the reverse hypers through them. Strongman, he taught Eric Dawson, and Eric Dawson taught me a lot of form, and Eric also influenced a lot of other guys when it comes to strongman. And then Murph is the same guy that or same individual who brought the Olympic lifting, the Russians, into the area. So he gave Nikita the first chance to coach in his gym, and then Nikita brought Vasily over from Russia, and Vasily was like a 5-time national champion and like a European champion. So his technique was great. He's super strong. So he came along, and eventually they moved over to Norwood. But if it wasn't for Murph kind of bringing them on, I would probably never learn all this Olympic technique. And then he was the first. Then the minute I won my pro card, he sponsored me. So he would help with trips. He gave me, of course, a free gym membership. But he was the first like believer in me. But he was this tough gym owner. He just when he talks, his chin hairs move. So I was just like, this guy's tough, but there was something to him that I loved. And then learning about like all the guys I've come through there. Of course, your pictures are still up on the wall today. And of course, he always talked about you. But then other athletes that came through, like Kevin Nee, who was one of the youngest strongmen to make the World's Strongest Man finals. And then there was Sven Carlson, who used to come over and do seminars. So there was just so much like history. And he learned from another individual, Art McDermott, who was like Northern Mass, about strongman. So there's just so much like history and like strength knowledge, but like that whole I think the whole Massachusetts scene in terms of strength was really propped up by Murph starting a gym and being able to bring all these people. But at one point, especially that every location I think was a special location. Just not only did it have like a great view, it had the shed, but you had so many different like factions or cliques within the gym. So you used to have like an Olympic lifting crew, and then you had a powerlifting crew, you had a rod crew, you had, of course, the geared powerlifters that Murph was hanging out. Then you had some bodybuilders in there, and then you used to have like Latinas in 2 pieces, and then you used to have Latinas in 1 pieces. So you had all these different, like, it was a melting pot of like every type of individuals within strength sports and iron sports, all kind of working together, and anybody was coming through that gym at that time.
When you went there, was it right after college?
So it was a year after college. So I graduated in 2011. I started when I bought my place in South Boston. So I started to go there full time in October. I stopped a few times that summer.
So when you went in there the first time, coming from this college weight room wrestling environment,
Sure.
what do you think the first time you go in there and see all this shit?
Oh, I thought it was awesome. There was just
Okay.
like so many people, like so many high level lifters, just everybody just having like big workouts, all the shouting and screaming, not what I was like really used to.
Yeah.
And then just seeing the same regular friendly faces and everybody kind of propping each other up and people getting excited because you're interested in what they do. So it's just not an environment that I was used to. So it was very, at the time it was just, of course it was, kind of not took over, but it really got me excited to get into the sport.
Those type of environments, people either just love it, they hate it,
Sure.
right? So it's interesting. I like to ask that question to people that come from different, that weren't. I was raised in shit like that. You know, it's like, well, what do you think when we went there the first time? I was like, oh my God, you know, I thought they were gonna fucking kill me or whatever, this crazy ass stuff. Then there's the other ones who are like, no, man, this was like home. And like, that's kind of fucked up. I mean, if you think about it, but it's great.
But yeah, I like, of course, starting out, I had some of like the best times in that gym. And I used to have this thing called the shed. It was outside. It used to be like 100 degrees in there, and that's where I put in a lot of time, a lot of grit work in there, and I think it was better for it.
As you move into the heavyweight class, where I don't want to say where one of the topics on here was your future, but I think we already talked on it, but we only talked like you're going to be a super heavy, you know, a heavyweight. So where do you see that? How do you do this? I don't like to do this in a way that makes people cocky as hell. What are you aspiring to work towards?
Sure. I think the first initial goals would be at every major contest. So within the heavyweight strongman realm, you of course have World's Strongest Man, you have the Arnold Classic, you have the Giants Live contest, they're all over England. You have the Shaw Classic, the Rogue Invitational, and then even like the Strongman Champions League is making a comeback, having a lot of great competitors, and they're all over Europe. Just being able to participate in each of those big individual shows is the first initial goal. I think it's going to take 3 years. I'm only not even 1 year done, 3 years to get to that point. I've seen my career kind of sometimes at 3 year segments of like how much different and how much work I put in and how much results I get out of it. So sometimes it takes 3 years to almost bump up to another level or bump up to another strength level or whatever, however you want to classify it. So in 3 years, I hope to be at those contests. And then after those 3 years, I'm 34 now, 35. At 36, I'm going to probably got to reassess and see where I'm at. Like, am I at those contests? Am I not? What do I need? Am I close to it? But again, at that point, if I'm still healthy, still willing, then I want to start pushing to potentially win those contests. So similar to what I did at the 105 level, get to those contests first, be involved, be around those guys, see what it takes. Because even get into the contest, what I tell even younger competitors, once you compete often, you get to learn, you get to know these guys, you get to learn what it takes, you gain so much information, you gain so much data of what it really takes to be a top level competitor. These guys start becoming your friends. You learn just through their experiences of how to be a better athlete. But once you get into that network, that tremendously will help your progress. So if I can get into those networks, I think that's where I want to be. So of course, will I ever win World's Strongest Man? Who knows? But again, I think it should always be your goal, and potentially you aim high, miss small. but I first need to get to those contests before I can consider myself in contention for World's Strongest Man.
Now, some of those are invites, some of them are not.
Yes.
So how do you qualify for them? If you're a pro, are you already qualified for the ones that are not invites?
So for instance, I'll start. All right, I'll go through all of them.
Yeah.
So the Arnold Classic, there's 9 invites, and then there's 9 like special invites. So whoever's like popular, whoever they deemed as the strongest, and then there's 1 individual. If you win the Arnold Amateur, you get an invite to the show next year.
Which you can't do that, right?
Actually, so as a fun fact, as it says, I'm a 105 kilo pro, I'm allowed to do the heavyweight amateur.
Okay.
So technically, I'm a heavyweight amateur, 105 kilo pro in the Strongman Corporation Federation, and they host the Arnold Amateur. So
there's one path.
So as a benefit, as a 100 kilo pro, and I've been using this since 2016, I can always hop into the heavyweight amateur. I don't have to qualify through how they have like regular heavies. I have to do a local show, 2 nationals, and do the Arnold. I can actually go and compete every year. So that's a huge benefit. Giants Live, usually you got to be outstanding, or you got to qualify through the official Strongman Games or the European Championships that they have for official Strongman, which is a top 3 will get you into a Giants Live invite. World's Strongest Man, again, if you're outstanding, you can get in there. Like, for instance, the current World's Strongest Man, Mitchell Hooper, the year before, Ronald Heinle dropped out, and he had a 1,046 pull on his own. And they, of course, saw that and was like, we need to get this guy into World's Strongest Man. But at that time, he's only done 4 competitions. But they guessed right. He ended up winning his group, and then went on to take 8th in the final, and then went on and started steamrolling kind of through these competitions as he grew in the sport. So again, there's always the exceptions, but normally if you're going to qualify, you're going to have to go through official Strongman Games, then get to the Giants Live, take top 3 at Giants Live, and then make it to World's Strongest Man. So that's usually like the most common path. Let's see, Rogue Invitational, they take the 10 best guys. Strongman Champions League, a lot of time is they take the best of every European championship. So fun fact, I was born in Italy, lived there for 6 years, moved to Boston. So I had to renounce my Italian citizenship back when, so I didn't get drafted. So I'm trying to get my citizen back, but I'm actually in talks to compete at Italy's Strongest Man in the way so I can start being involved in the European contest. So open up a whole new segment. And I was telling you, the Europeans compete so much. There's also I guess a lore between like strength sports in Europe. They just love strength sports compared to all the Americans. And let's see, the Shaw Classic has its own invitational, but also you can be outstanding and get a special invite. But most likely, I probably have to earn it. So that's why I got to focus on this. That's why I'm in more of a growth phase right now. But I have, similar to kind of talking to business, you're looking at kind of 3 or 4 years ahead. I'm looking at 3 years and then reassessing kind of where I'm at. Which
is kind of cool, because that's what I was trying to, when we were talking earlier, was to, as you came up, you didn't have the quadrennials. You had these spots, these things that you're striving for. Now you're thinking more in that lines because of that, which the cool thing about that is that means that the first year doesn't really matter if you compete, don't compete, how you compete. You have to fulfill what objectives you put out for that first year, which is to build the physique necessary to compete bigger. Right. Yes. To be bigger. That's the number one priority. Get bigger. Don't lose mobility. All the shit that you're doing.
Yeah. And don't get hurt.
Right. So survive that first year.
Is this wood? No.
No, it's metal. It's metal. Yeah. And where that's strategically how I think everybody needs to think about training. But as you're coming up, you don't, right? Because just young, you're kind of getting into it. But then you can do that. And then it makes it easier to make the decisions that are right now, not right now, but that are correct now, like that, which I think that you're doing because you haven't been hurt, right?
Well, throughout the strongman career, I've only had the meniscus and then the SI, so relatively I've stayed injury free. I would say there's not a lot of strongmen that go 10 plus years competing. Sometimes they fizzle out at 7 or 8 years because injuries, of course, hold them back. So,
well, how many come up through the ranks like you did though?
in terms of like becoming like a champion.
Well, I'm saying if they, when you say strongman, are you talking the heavyweights?
I would say, yeah,
Or
you
just
know,
in
I think
general?
that would apply to the heavyweights as well. So I would say,
So
like,
for all.
yeah, so I
Okay.
would say like a 10-year career for most strongmen would be pretty long.
Okay.
And then after that point, it's if they're still competing, they're doing something right in
All
terms
right.
of
That changes my context because I was just thinking heavyweights,
Mhm.
you know, where how many of the heavyweights that are there, you know, have 10 years to get there,
Mhm.
you know, probably more than I think. Actually, no, I'm thinking probably almost all of them, right? So there's the longevity,
Mhm.
you know, that comes into that. But how many of them competed as middleweight and moved up?
So there's out there a few great examples. So you have Rob Kearney. He made the move in 2016, and then he's been at every big show.
Yeah.
And he hit the American record at one point. You have Kevin Ferris, who won the SCL World's Strongest Man title back in 2016, and then he moved up, and again he's at every big show. He sits around like 285. There's Graham Hicks and Adam Bishop, who now they're in the 300s. I think Graham Hicks is like 360, like 5'10", 360. He's a super static monster. But he made the move, but they made the move a little early. I'm making the move a little late. I'm like 10 years into the career and doing it. But I also had to push through my mentor, Sean DeMarinis, to really, and Sean was a 4-time America's Strongest Man, but he said, don't fuck around the 105s too long like I did. I think you got to move on, and you already did everything they were supposed to do for 105. And he told me that after actually I won World. So actually I was going to do one more 105 show and then move up, but I ended up getting hurt. So that got delayed. But at the time, I didn't think I was growing out of the class. I thought I was going to be a 105 lifer, but then I realized that I'm putting on a lot of mass, and the cuts are getting harder and harder and harder. So when I made the move, I also kind of wanted to see how big I can get, and when I took off the weight regulators, how strong can I be? So there's also that component of like, I might not ever get to those big shows, but like I can, one goal of mine is realize my strength goals, and maybe I can be super strong and be happy with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the whole process. I mean, that's the thing anyhow. I mean, that should be the main goal. And then the other ones are secondary, but it doesn't work that way. The other ones drive, you know, that main thing. Any topics that I didn't bring up that are coming to your mind? Actually, competition mindset was another one there.
Ooh.
So talk about that one a little bit.
That's a great one. So I think for the most part, when you come to the competitions, I say usually you want to be your best self. You're not only peaking in the gym, and as an athlete, but you almost want to peak as a person. So you're almost doing everything right in your daily life, not only work and recovery and sleep, but you're also, of course, all your relationships are in check. Because if you're competing on borrowed time, borrowed money, if you're just running up your credit card, that's always going to come back and going to be more detrimental in the long run. So I've seen a lot of people kind of fall off because let's just say they're competing, but they're ignoring injuries, and they have one devastating injury and they never come back from that. So again, when you kind of compete, I think you have to mature as a person, getting into those competitions. So, I think even when I fell short, I had things in my life that were kind of complicating things and complicating making competing hard. So I think I've had that kind of mindset. But also a little bit what we were talking about before, competing when it comes to, again, I guess picking and choosing your battles, right? So you have competitions that are for experience, competitions for adventure. Sometimes like it's a far out place. You're going over to Europe to compete. So you're also going to make that a vacation. So you're exploring. So you're having fun with it. But then you have competitions that you're purely executing. You want to see how you rank up against the best strongman in the country, best strongman and the best strongwoman in the country or in the world. So you're purely executing. Those are the 12-week preps you got to put in.
Yeah.
So you got to pick out the mindset. But again, you can't always be running 12-week preps all year round. You got to pick your battles.
The one part that you were saying about, you know, kind of balance your life going into it is the stress is stress, And we've already talked that as you get closer and closer to a show before you start to taper for that, you're already at the highest risk of physically tearing yourself down. Because it's all strength sport. Now, if you put in all the other stuff being messed up, that's even more cortisol. That's even more stress. That makes that even harder to be able to recover from. And I think a lot of people miss that, that one aspect where if they can just tie up those things, like just unfuck your life for 6 weeks, before, I think they would do so much better if they were able to do that. But sometimes the stress of competing gets to them so much. The what ifs, like, well, what if this happens? What if this is my elbow really screwed up? Is it not screwed up? Is my shoulder screwed up or not screwed up? Oh my God, so-and-so entered, it's all the things that come around with all this. Then that becomes self-consuming, which then starts screwing up their work, which then starts screwing up the relationships. And then it's this circle of hell.
Sure.
That can be stopped. I think if the athlete can just know what's happening. Be self, what do you want to say? Self-analyze. Where am I at this period of time and why am I getting upset? Like maybe that person needs to not be on social media the last 6 weeks, right? Because or maybe they didn't need to not worry about what their competitors are doing.
Sure.
Because it doesn't really make any difference.
I think a lot of times, for instance, if you have the mindset of course, adding to what I say, if you have the mindset of PRing on all your events or PRing on all your lifts, and you don't have the outcome, but you PR on the best day, that's the best you did the best you could do. Even though you wanted the outcome of winning, it wasn't there that day, but you were still the best self that you ever brought to that table. So if you keep that process going, you'll eventually get to where you want to be. But sometimes that's a hard thing to look at. Like you had a great day, you PR'd on everything, but you just still didn't win.
Yeah,
that's a hard competition item to grasp.
If you're online doing an AMA or your DMs or even at a seminar, what's the most frequently asked question that you get?
I get a lot of Tsunami Bar stuff. I think just like what are the benefits? What has this done for you in your career? But I think a lot of it is the most frequent asked questions. I think sometimes how you line up your competing and like sometimes it's specific, like what should I do right now as a competitor if they're pretty into it, but sometimes it's just like teach me how to split jerk.
Okay.
So sometimes I only probably for every 9 simple questions I get one thoughtful individual that kind of gets it and is asking the right question.
What would be the one question that you wish they all did ask?
It's probably like, what are like 5 things I could do to get better today that are outside of just training and competing.
And what would you say those are?
Oh, so that's recovery, that's like sleep, diet, and then of course balancing in life a little bit, where we just chatted about. And what's a good 5th one? And then you could just say a good one would be probably like cardio and like mobility and stretching, if in its own subtopic.
Yeah. So right? All the stuff they don't want to do.
Exactly.
Anything else that you want to talk about or bring up? Because I waxed the list here.
You did wax the list. I think for the most part we went over a lot of it. Do you have any good Murph stories that you think I don't know about?
Oh God.
So like, of course I tuned in. I listened actually a couple times to the Murph podcast. So I always like to listen to like old timey Murph and hanging out with the boys. I
actually get more Murph stories from you guys than I actually have.
Yeah.
Because you're around him all the time.
It's funny. It's funny. I feel like he always cuts himself short. He's always like, I'm a pro-ish, or he's like, or his self, like, but he's accomplished a lot. He decided to kind of focus on like multiple sports at a time, and then as well as running a business and of course, in a full-time job. So I feel like he cuts himself short in sometimes, but he's done so much for the strength community. But I think we're all in that motion, like we can always do more. We could always been better.
He, the way that I kind of see it is when I met him, he was still a prison guard. And I think he was a cop before that, if I'm not mistaken. And he was trying to retire, right? Because there's retirement or something like that, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So before he would go all into the gym. And he did dabble in a lot of the disciplines. It's the strongman thing was that, and then the powerlifting, the geared powerlifting. But on the other side of that, he also was dabbling around in the fitness world. It's just because we have these niches, like there's a strongman niche, there's a powerlifting niche. So we have a strength and conditioning niche. So there's all these different niches. He was in all of them, which normally you'll see people that are just stay in one and then kind of associate with people on kind of the other ones. But, it's with him, it's and this is to his benefit. Normally I'm busting his balls on stuff like that, right? To him, I mean, he was able to navigate, the fitness side, it's just the general health fitness side, and these other sides, which you don't see very often. You really don't. It's not that the fitness side is just like, screw all you guys. I think a lot of it is, a lot of us will look at the fitness side, man, it's all gimmicky bullshit. I mean, you're selling fat loss creams and, all this other crap that kind of goes on that side. But was able to build relationships with people in all areas of that, and I don't know genetically if he even had the potential to be able to super excel in any of these things. So I don't know if it was because people make, bust his ass for stuff like that. And, you're a two split. You could have been better if you just did this, or this. I don't know. I think it was better for him to do all of them, to be able to benefit other people in the gym, to be able to create the people that have come under him, or the people that came under the people that came under him. Because maybe he could have competed at a little bit higher level, but would that have been at the sacrifice of, say, you potentially being the world's strongest man someday?
The influence that he had.
Yeah. So I think that the influence that he's had has been, it's underrated. Right? So it's that I would put out there. He is a character. There's no doubt about that. It's just funnier and shit,
he's soft now. He was harder when I first met him, but now he gives me hugs and kisses sometimes.
Yeah.
And of course, but yeah, I think he's softened up in his older years.
Could be.
Still love his whiskey.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of some of there was the one I told you about where he had to cut that monolith, but we would come up for seminars and stuff like that. And I mean, there's so many times you're like, it's like we're having a seminar here, and it's there's 5 or 6 different speakers, and it's called the big seminar. Then you get there and like there's nothing, there's no chairs. Like, where the fuck are people supposed to sit? I mean, it's just Murph, right? It's just kind of how it was. Just those typical stories. And the what made it most of the stories better, he's not afraid to say whatever the fuck's on his mind, which is sometimes so wrong to say at certain periods of time. But it's not hurtful, right? It's just funnier and shit if you're the outsider coming into that, because it's like, what the, it's crazy.
Well, he gave me the hard truth when the first year. He's like, your form is shit, but you could be world's strongest man one day. I was like, I don't know how to take that.
Yeah, I know, that was the thing. So I'd see something like that, like at a seminar where somebody's never met. I'm like, dude, man, you shouldn't do that. Fuck them if they can't take the truth. I'm like, oh, okay, that works. And then you find out later, like, man, that was the best thing that you. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's the greatest thing you ever could say. I want to thank you for coming out, man. This has been great.
Absolutely. Well, of course, ever since I've known Murph since 2012, he's always talked about Elite FTS. So it's great to finally get out here. It's like a milestone, something I always wanted to do. So thank you for having me.
No, I appreciate your time. Like I said, I appreciate coming out, guys. His link is in the description. Follow him, and we're done.
We're done.
We're done.